Vivienne Cross, CEO of a $100 million company, grabbed a total stranger's arm in a parking garage and said 6 words she had never said to anyone in her life. "I'm begging you. Please help me." Noah Bennett looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face, then at the envelope she was pressing into his chest. $15,000 cash for 1 week of pretending to love her. He handed it back. "Keep your money." She froze. "But I'll do it," he said. "Under one condition, and it's not negotiable." What that single dad demanded next didn't just change her week. It dismantled every wall she'd spent years building. Drop your city in the comments, since I want to see how far this story reaches. Subscribe and don't go anywhere. This one goes all the way. The engine arrived on a Tuesday. Noah Bennett had driven 4 hours from Briar Glen, North Carolina, with a 1968 Chris Craft Constellations marine engine strapped into the bed of his F-150 like a patient that had survived surgery it wasn't supposed to survive. Every bolt on that engine had been touched by his hands, every seal replaced, every corroded fitting cleaned until it looked like the year it was cast. He needed the final payment. Not wanted. Needed. The roof on his repair shop had a hole big enough to see stars through on a clear night. Sophie's pulmonologist had added a second medication to her asthma protocol in March, and the insurance company had denied the claim twice. The mortgage on the property. The same land his father had bought in 1987. The same cinder block building where Noah had learned to read torque specs before he learned to read novels was 92 days past due. He had called Crosswave Technologies 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Each time he reached a different assistant who promised a callback that never came. So he drove up, loaded the engine, showed up at the service entrance of a glass and steel building in Richmond, Virginia, that cost more to build than his entire street was worth, and told the security guard he wasn't leaving without speaking to someone who could authorize a check. 20 minutes later, a woman in a white blouse and gray slacks walked through the service bay door and looked at the engine like she'd never seen one in her life. "Mr. Bennett." "That's me. Ms. Cross would like to see you." Noah wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at the engine, then back at the woman. "I can meet with accounting. I don't need—" "She specifically asked for you." He followed her through a service corridor, up a freight elevator that smelled like lemon cleaner, and down a hallway lined with framed press covers, Forbes Fast Company Inc., all featuring the same face. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back, eyes that looked at the camera like they were calculating something the photographer couldn't see. The conference room she led him into had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the James River. Someone had set 2 bottles of water on the table. Nobody else was in the room. He waited 4 minutes. He knew because he checked. When Vivienne Cross walked in, she closed the door herself. She was smaller in person than the magazine covers suggested, maybe 5'4". Her suit was the color of charcoal, and she moved like someone who had learned a long time ago that hesitation was expensive. She sat across from him without shaking his hand, set a thin folder on the table, and looked at him with the same expression she wore in every photograph. Calculating. "Thank you for bringing the engine personally. The investor wanted it inspected in transit. I do that myself. I know. I read your service contract." She folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Bennett, I'm going to say something to you that I don't say easily, and I need you to hear it before you respond." Noah set down his water bottle. "I need your help. With something unrelated to the engine. I'm a marine mechanic." "I know what you are." Something in the way she said it made him go still. Not aggressive, not dismissive, just precise like a woman who chose every word the way an engineer chose tolerances. "Then you know I'm not sure what I can help you with." She opened the folder. Inside was a photograph. A lakeside estate stone and timber wraparound porch, a private dock with 2 boats and a boathouse. The kind of place that didn't appear on vacation rental sites because people who owned them didn't need rental income. "My parents are celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary next week. 7 days at their estate on Lake Belhaven. Family, close friends, some longtime associates." She slid the photo toward him. "And a man named Graham Whitmore." Noah looked at the photo, looked at her. "Who is he?" The man my parents believe I should marry. Silence. Outside the window, the river caught the afternoon light and threw it back in pieces. Ms. Cross. Vivian, I still don't understand what this has to do with me. She met his eyes for the first time since she sat down, and for just a second, one unguarded human second, he saw it. Not fear exactly. Something more like exhaustion. The kind that settles into a person after years of managing everything alone. I need someone to come with me as my boyfriend. Someone credible enough that my parents stop pushing Graham toward me. Someone who can hold a conversation, handle himself in a room full of people who'll be looking for weaknesses and not... She paused. Not collapse when things get difficult. Noah didn't say anything. I would compensate you $15,000 for 7 days. I have background notes prepared, a timeline of our supposed relationship answers to questions your family members are likely to ask. I've done the preparation. I need someone who can execute it. Noah looked at the folder again. Then he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Why me? Because you spent 4 months restoring an engine for a client who never once tried to rush you or offer you more money to cut corners. Because you called my office 3 times rather than submitting a collections notice. Because the investor who commissioned the work told me you're the most straightforward man he's met in 20 years of doing business in this state. She paused. And because you drove 4 hours this morning with that engine in your truck, which tells me you're not the kind of person who sends someone else to do something important. You researched me. I research everyone. Noah stood up. He walked to the window and looked at the river for a long moment, and she let him. She didn't prompt him or restate the offer. She just waited. He turned around. No. She didn't blink. May I ask why? Because lying to a family about something this personal is a different category from a business arrangement. Your parents are celebrating 40 years together. You want me to stand next to you in front of them and pretend to be someone I'm not at an event that means something real to them. He shook his head. I don't do that. The alternative is your problem to solve. I'm sorry. He picked up his jacket from the chair. I'll send someone from accounting downstairs to process my payment. Mr. Bennett? He stopped at the door. Her voice hadn't changed. It was still controlled, still measured. But something underneath it had shifted just enough that he heard it. I'm not asking you to hurt them. I'm asking you to protect them from a man who will. He turned around slowly. She was still seated, both hands flat on the table now, like she was steadying herself against something invisible. Graham Whitmore spent 18 months engaged to me 4 years ago. During that time, he used my trust and my access to attempt a hostile restructuring of my company. He had help from inside Crosswave people I considered colleagues. The engagement ended before he succeeded. She kept her voice level. My parents never knew the full truth. They believe I chose my career over the relationship. They've been trying to correct that decision ever since. She looked at the photograph of the estate. If Graham is present for a week at that house with my parents' blessing and my apparent unavailability, he will try again. Not with the company this time. With them. With family leverage. She looked up. I can't tell my parents the truth without destroying their belief that people they trusted were honest. And I can't walk in there alone without becoming a target. Noah stood in the doorway. The hallway behind him was quiet. He thought about his father, who had shaken hands on every deal he'd ever made, and never once regretted it. He thought about Natalie, who had made him promise in the last months of her illness that he wouldn't let fear make his decisions. He thought about Sophie, who had asked him last week whether the shop was going to be okay, and whose face when he said yes held more hope than any 8-year-old should have to carry. He walked back to the table. He sat down. I'll do it, he said. But not the way you've planned it. She waited. I'm not going to stay in a guest wing and eat when the family eats and smile on cue and disappear when things get uncomfortable. If I'm your boyfriend, I'm your boyfriend. I'm present. I'm treated like an equal, not an employee, not a prop, not someone you manage from a safe distance. He held her gaze. If your father asks me something difficult, I answer it honestly. If your mother wants to know how we met, I'll tell her the version we agreed on, but I'll tell it like a man who actually knows you. And if Graham decides he wants to test me in front of a room full of people, I handle that myself without a script. He leaned forward slightly. One more thing. If at any point during this week something feels wrong to me, not inconvenient wrong, I walk. With the money. We clear. Vivian Cross had been in hundreds of negotiations. Noah could tell by the way she absorbed his terms without writing anything down, without flinching, without asking him to clarify any of it. Clear, she said. Then we have a deal. She extended her hand across the table. When he shook it, her grip was firm and direct and brief, and she looked him in the eye the entire time. They met 3 days later at a diner halfway between Richmond and Briar Glen. Her idea. He appreciated that she didn't suggest her office. She came with a leather portfolio full of printed notes, a laminated timeline of their fictional relationship, and a typed list of 37 questions she anticipated her family asking. He came with a legal pad and 4 questions of his own. She looked at the legal pad. I have a full briefing prepared. I know, I'll read it. He tapped the pad. But I need answers to these first. She looked at the questions. 1. What makes your mother laugh? Not smile, actually laugh. 2. What is your father's biggest distrust of corporate men specifically? 3. What is the one food you genuinely hate and why? 4. What do you do with your hands when you're frightened? Vivian set the portfolio down. Why does the food question matter? Because if we're at dinner and your mother asks whether you enjoyed her pot roast, and I don't know, you hate pot roast, the pause before you answer will tell her everything she needs to know. She was quiet for a moment. Brussels sprouts. My mother made them every Sunday growing up and insisted they were good for me, and I ate them every week for 15 years because I didn't want to disappoint her. She paused. I still cannot be in the same room with them. There it is. There what is? A real detail. He wrote it down. You know 37 facts about what your family might ask me, but you know one true thing about yourself that tells me more than all of them. He looked up. Your mother cooked something she thought was good for you every week for 15 years. You hated it and ate it anyway because you loved her. That's the version of Vivian Cross your boyfriend would know. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to manage. It wasn't quite discomfort, and it wasn't quite recognition. It was somewhere between them. You're not what I expected. You said that already, differently. I did. You told me I was straightforward. That's a polite way of saying I surprised you. He turned to the second question on his pad. Your father. What specifically does he distrust about corporate men? She picked up her coffee cup. My father built his money in hardware distribution. Physical product, physical labor, physical sales. He shook hands with people who fix things for a living, and he distrusts anyone who profits without producing something tangible. He's never once said it's about class. But it is a little. She paused. He will test you. Good. Good. A man who tests is a man who can be convinced. The ones who've already decided are worse. He wrote something on the pad. What does your mother find funny? Vivian tilted her head slightly. A small pause. She loves physical comedy. Old movies. She quotes Cary Grant, and she does it in a terrible accent, and she thinks it's much funnier than it is, and my father laughs at it every single time because she thinks it's funny, not because the impression is good. A soft surprise in her voice, like she hadn't expected to recall it so clearly. She'll quote something at dinner probably. She always does when she's nervous. And your father will laugh. Every time. Noah smiled for the first time since they'd sat down, and it caught her off guard. She looked down at her coffee. What? She asked. Your parents are in love, he said. Like actually in love. Still. He stopped. That's going to make this easier than I thought. She looked at him carefully. Why? Because people who are genuinely in love with each other can still recognize the real thing when they see it next to a performance. They're not going to be fooled by facts. They're going to be looking for something that feels true. Vivian set her cup down with precision, and he noticed because he was already paying attention that she moved her thumb along the handle before she let go of it. Just once. A small private motion like checking that the world was still solid. What do you do with your hands when you're frightened? He already had his answer. There's one more thing, she said. The fourth question. Graham. She said it the way you say a word that tastes bad. Why do you want to know specifically why he matters? Because I need to know what I'm actually protecting you from. Not the business version, the personal version. What does he do that scares you? She was very still. He knows how to make you feel seen, she finally said. He's excellent at it. He remembers details. He asks the right questions. He creates this. She pressed her lips together. This sense of being known. And then once you believe it, he uses it. She looked at the window beside their table. The parking lot. A woman loading groceries into a minivan. Ordinary, unreachable things. I spent 18 months thinking he loved me. He spent 18 months taking notes. Noah didn't say anything. He didn't offer condolences or an observation or a redirect. He just stayed with what she said, the way a good mechanic stays, with an unusual sound present attending, waiting to understand it. I'm not Graham, he finally said. I know. But you should know I'm going to ask you real questions this week. Not because I'm building a case. Because I can't play a man who knows you if I don't actually know you. He closed the legal pad. That might be uncomfortable. I'm familiar with discomfort. Not this kind. She looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of amusement, or might have been the beginning of fear. Maybe both. What kind exactly? The kind where someone's paying attention to you and there's no agenda attached to it. He picked up his coffee. It's different from being watched. Takes some getting used to. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced down. Dad, did you remember my green inhaler is in the blue case this week because I reorganized. Also, I got a B+ on my science test. Also, can I get a dog? He smiled before he could stop himself. Vivian had seen it. Your daughter. Sophie. 8 years old and extremely confident about her organizational systems. He typed a reply quickly. Sorry. Don't apologize. She said it quickly, then looked like she hadn't meant to say it quite that fast. What's she like? He looked up. Her expression was careful, not clinical. Something underneath it that she was working to keep from showing. Terrifying, he said honestly. She asks questions I'm not ready for, and she remembers everything I've ever told her, and she has opinions about people that are almost always right. Scares me every single day. He paused. She's also the best person I know. Vivian was quiet. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. I don't have experience with children. Most people don't until they do. I mean, I'm not... She stopped. Tried again. I wouldn't want my uncertainty to be a problem. She nodded. He thought about it for a second. Genuinely thought about it, which was not the same as reassuring her. Sophie decides who she trusts, he said. That's not your decision or mine. She'll make up her mind about you inside of 20 minutes, and whatever she concludes will be approximately correct. He shrugged. So probably don't overthink it. She'll see right through that anyway. Vivian's expression shifted slightly. Something that was almost a smile, except it stayed behind her eyes, where she kept things she wasn't ready to put in the world yet. She sounds like someone I should be prepared for. You cannot be prepared for Sophie. That's kind of the whole thing. She nodded slowly like she was filing that away. They sat with that for a moment. Outside the diner, a truck pulled into the lot, and the sound of it, the idle, the low rattle of a diesel, made Noah's ear do what it always did. Catalog the vibration, check it against every engine he'd ever heard. Old habit. 34 years of paying attention to the things that gave themselves away if you listened. He looked at the woman across the table. She was reading through her own notes now, reorganizing something, moving facts from one page to another. Even off the clock she was working. Even in a diner with bad lighting and coffee that had been on the burner too long, she was solving problems. He wondered if she ever got tired. He wondered if she ever let herself. One thing you should know about me before we get there, he said. She looked up. I don't perform well when I'm performing. What I mean is, if I'm trying to act like your boyfriend, I'll be terrible at it. If I'm just being myself around you, that'll read more convincing than anything we rehearse in a parking lot. He met her eyes. So I'd rather spend this week actually getting to know you than running lines. She studied him for a long moment. Long enough that he started to think she was going to pull out the scripted Q&A and hand it to him anyway. Instead, she closed the portfolio. Okay, she said. Just that. But the way she said it, quiet something given up in it, something let go, made him understand that for Vivian Cross agreement without conditions was not a small thing. It might have been the first honest one she'd offered anyone in years. The morning they were supposed to leave for Lake Belhaven, his phone rang at 6:14 a.m. Sophie. Dad, I told Grandma you'd be back Sunday, and she got upset because she thought it was Saturday, and now she's making oatmeal for 17 people, which is just her and me. Soph. Also, I can't find my nebulizer mask, the small one, and I need you to tell me which box. Medicine cabinet, second shelf behind the antifungal cream. Ew, why is it behind that? Because you won't look behind that. A pause. He could hear her opening the cabinet. The little clatter of bottles. Found it. Another pause. Dad, are you going somewhere important? He pulled his jacket from the chair and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He'd ironed the shirt. He didn't iron shirts. Kind of. Like a job or like a... Sophie stopped. He could almost hear her thinking, which was something he'd never gotten used to, because it sounded exactly like Natalie when she was deciding whether to say the real thing. Like a person... It's complicated. Dad, I'm 8, not 5. You can tell me. He sat down on the edge of the bed. There's a client who needs help with something. I'm going to be gone most of the week. At Grandma's? Yeah. Another pause. Longer. Is the shop going to be okay? He closed his eyes. Yeah, baby. The shop's going to be okay. Promise. Yeah, I promise. He heard her breathe out. He heard the specific sound of her relief, the little drop in tension that told him she'd been holding it. How long last night, last week, and only let go of it now that he'd said the word promise, because she had decided somewhere along the way that his promises were the thing you could build on when everything else moved. That was the weight he drove toward Lake Belhaven carrying. They had agreed he would arrive separately. Vivian's story was that Noah had needed to drop off something at a client's property en route plausible, practical. The kind of logistical footnote a real person's real life generated. Noah had agreed to the plan and then ignored the timing entirely, arriving 40 minutes earlier than planned because he'd driven the route the night before on Google Maps and added 22 minutes for a traffic variable she hadn't factored in. He pulled the F-150 through the estate gate behind a catering van parked where the gravel widened near a stone wall and sat for a moment. The place was exactly what the photograph had been. More so. The kind of house that had been lived in long enough to stop trying to impress anyone, which made it more impressive than the ones that were still trying. The dock extended over water that caught the afternoon sun and gave it back blue. 2 kayaks on a rack, a stone path to the boathouse, an American flag on the end of the dock moving just enough. He got out. He took his bag from behind the seat. He took the toolbox too, because you didn't go somewhere for a week without being able to fix things. The front door of the estate opened before he reached the porch. A woman in her early 60s stood in the doorway. White hair pulled back loosely, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a dish towel tucked into the pocket of her jeans. She looked at his truck first, then at him, then at his toolbox. You must be Noah, Helen Cross said. Yes, ma'am? Helen. She said it firmly, the way you say a thing you've had to correct before. The ma'am makes me feel like a schoolteacher. She stepped back to let him in. Vivian's upstairs. Helen paused. Something moved across her face, and she was quick enough to redirect it before he could name it. She's been watching for your truck for the last 20 minutes. Noah said nothing. He let that land where it wanted to. The entry hall was warm wood floors. Family photos going back several generations. A coat rack with actual coats on it. It smelled like something with rosemary, and under that like old lake water and wood smoke. Like a real house that people actually lived in, as opposed to a photograph of one. Helen led him toward a sitting room, and from the hallway he heard a door open above them on the second floor. He didn't look up immediately. He looked at the photographs on the wall. Richard and Helen Young on a dock somewhere. Helen laughing at something the camera couldn't see. Richard looking at her instead of the camera. He heard Vivian's footsteps on the stairs before he heard her voice, and when she appeared in the sitting room doorway, something in her posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough. A controlled exhale. Like something she'd been bracing for had finally arrived and turned out to be manageable. "You're early," she said. Traffic was light. She looked at his toolbox. "You brought tools." "I always bring tools." Helen from somewhere behind him made a sound that might have been approval. Richard Cross came in from the back of the house through a door that smelled like lake air and oil. A man who'd been in the boathouse Noah's nose told him, and who'd been working on something. He was broad-shouldered for a man in his mid-60s, with Vivian's eyes, and the bearing of someone who had made enough money to stop proving anything to anyone, but had never quite turned off the instinct. He looked at Noah, the way men who built things with their hands look at other men who build things with their hands. Not welcoming, not hostile, appraising. Richard Cross. Noah Bennett. They shook hands. Richard's grip was a test as expected. Noah matched it without escalating it firm, and even, and done the handshake of a man who had nothing to prove with pressure. Richard held the grip one extra beat, then released it. "You drove up from Briar Glen this morning, left early. What do you drive?" "Ford F-150, 09, 250,000 miles. Richard glanced past it toward the window that faced the front drive. "That your truck by the wall?" "Yes, sir." "You do your own maintenance?" "I do everything myself." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Richard Cross's expression. Not warmth, not yet, but the first door opening. He turned to Vivian. He brought a toolbox. Vivian looked at Noah with an expression that held something he was beginning to recognize. Recognized the particular look of a woman watching someone do something she hadn't planned for, and couldn't decide whether she resented or needed. "I noticed," she said. "The water pump on the east side of the house has been making a sound it shouldn't," Richard said to neither of them in particular. He turned back toward the door to the back of the house. "If you're interested." Noah set his bag down by the stairs. "Show me," he said. Vivian watched the two of them disappear through the back door and stood for a moment in the middle of the sitting room. Helen came to stand beside her. "He's early," Helen observed. "I know. He brought tools." "I noticed that too." Helen pulled the dish towel out of her pocket and folded it over her arm, the way she'd done for every conversation she'd ever had that she intended to take seriously. "He has kind eyes," she said. Vivian didn't answer. "And he didn't shake your father's hand harder than he needed to." Helen looked at her daughter for a long moment. "That's a man who doesn't need to prove things." From somewhere outside through the screen door and across the stone path came the sound of two men's voices. One asking something, one answering, and then underneath it, the sound of a pump that had been struggling for what sounded like weeks, settling into a rhythm it had apparently been trying to find. Vivian listened to it. Something in her chest settled along with it just slightly in a way that frightened her more than any of the things she'd planned for. Dinner. The first evening was the five of them and two family friends who had arrived earlier in the day. Polite strangers, cautious conversation. The kind of meal where everyone is performing a version of themselves slightly more composed than reality. Graham Whitmore arrived during the appetizer course. He moved through the doorway like a man who'd rehearsed arriving coordinated, easy good-looking in the specific way of men who maintained it deliberately. He greeted Helen warmly. He shook Richard's hand. He looked at Vivian for a moment longer than necessary, and his expression to anyone not watching closely read as fond. Noah was watching closely. Graham's gaze moved to him with the specific brief recalibration of a man who has encountered an unexpected variable. "Graham Whitmore." He extended his hand. Noah shook it. "Noah Bennett." "What do you do, Noah?" "Marine engine repair, restoration mostly, older boats." Graham let a half-second pass, not enough for anyone to call it a pause, just enough to land the implication. How interesting. And you and Vivian? 4 months, Noah said. Simple, no elaboration. Graham nodded slowly. I see. And where did the two of you— Graham. Vivian's voice was pleasant, level. Sit down. Helen made the crab cakes herself. He sat. Across the table, Vivian met Noah's eyes for exactly 1 second. He gave her nothing back. No signal, no confirmation. Just a man who had decided where he was and was comfortable there. That more than anything he had said or done unsettled Graham Whitmore. Noah could tell because the man picked up his fork and used it. And then, midway through the main course, when the conversation had wandered into the comfortable shallows of family stories and old memories, Helen leaned forward with the expression of someone about to share something good. You know, she said, attempting an accent that could only be described as aspirational, the best thing I ever did was to keep a certain dark-haired beauty waiting in the rain. She looked at Richard with enormous satisfaction. Richard Cross, pillar of the business community, former regional hardware distribution titan man, who had looked at Noah Bennett's handshake like an audit. Put down his wine glass and laughed. Actually laughed from the chest, with his whole face. The laugh of a man who had been laughing at this exact joke for 40 years and intended to laugh at it for 40 more. Noah looked at Vivian. She was looking at her parents, and on her face, visible only for a moment before she put it back. Wherever she kept. Such things was something he hadn't seen there yet. Grief. And love. The specific kind that only exists for things you're afraid of losing. He picked up his own glass. He didn't say anything, but he made a quiet private decision at that table, watching Helen Cross attempt Cary Grant, while her husband laughed like a young man that whatever it cost him this week, and he already sensed it was going to cost him something real, these were people worth protecting. Even from their own daughter's carefully managed distance. Later that night, after the family friends had gone up, and Richard had fallen asleep in his chair, and Helen had covered him with a blanket without waking him, Noah stood on the back porch with a glass of water and listened to the lake. It was the kind of quiet that only exists around water. Alive. Breathing. Like the dark itself had a pulse. He heard the door behind him open. Vivian came out and stood at the railing a few feet away. She hadn't changed into anything more casual, still the same composed clothes, same posture. He wondered if she ever actually put down the weight of herself. How's the pump? She asked. Running. Bearing was wearing out. I shimmed it for now, but your dad's going to need a part in the next month. She nodded. I'll order it. Let your father order it. She looked at him sideways. Why? Because it's his house and he likes fixing things, and you ordering the part reminds him that you can solve his problems with money instead of time. He looked at the water. Let him find it. Let him order it. Let him install it himself or call someone he trusts. Don't remove the problem before he has a chance to handle it. A long pause. I do that, she said quietly. Remove problems before anyone has to face them. I know. How? Because you brought me here. She was still. The water moved. The flag on the dock made a soft sound. That's a fair point, she finally said. He finished his water. Your parents love each other like it's still the first year, he said. 40 years, and your father still laughs at the same joke. That's not performance. That's a choice they make every day. He set the glass on the railing. Whatever happened with Graham, whatever happened with your company, they've been making that choice this whole time. Don't you think they can handle knowing the truth about the things that hurt you? She didn't answer. But she also didn't argue. And for Vivian Cross, he was beginning to understand. Not arguing was sometimes the bravest thing she could do. He picked up his glass and went inside. Behind him, he heard her stay at the railing. Heard her breathe. Heard the way the lake held the silence around her. He didn't look back. But he thought as he walked upstairs through a house full of sleeping people who had no idea what the week was about to become, that something had already changed. Something that had nothing to do with the check in Vivian's portfolio. Something that had no price on it at all. He'd come here to do a job. to earn $15,000 for a roof and a hospital bill, and a little girl who deserved a father who kept his promises. He hadn't planned to care, but the trouble with paying attention, the real kind, the kind he'd spent his whole life practicing on engines that told you the truth, if you listened, is that it doesn't stop working just because you want it to. And somewhere between a broken water pump and a woman who moved her thumb along a coffee cup handle, when she was frightened, Noah Bennett had started listening to something that had nothing to do with machinery at all. The second morning at Lake Belhaven. Noah woke up before anyone else in the house. That was normal for him. In Briar Glen, he was usually in the shop by 6, coffee in one hand, flashlight in the other, crawling under something that needed him. The body didn't unlearn that kind of schedule just because the location changed. High Mata Coffee in Helen's kitchen found the mugs without asking, because the mugs were exactly where mugs should be. First cabinet left of the sink, the way practical people organized kitchens, and stood at the window, watching the lake go from black to gray to the particular shade of blue that meant the sun was serious about showing up. He heard Richard before he saw him. The back door, the specific weight of a man who'd been using the same door for 30 years and knew exactly how hard to push it. Richard Cross walked into his own kitchen, stopped when he saw Noah, and looked at the coffee pot. "You figured out the machine." "It's a DeLonghi. My neighbor has the same one. The grind setting was too coarse, I adjusted it." Richard poured himself a cup, took a sip, set it down and looked at it. "That's better than it's been in 3 years." The burr was probably never calibrated out of the box. Richard pulled out the chair across from Noah and sat down. Not the chair at the head of the table, the one across. Equal distance. Noah noticed. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. The lake did its work outside. The coffee did its work inside. "Vivian tells us you've been together 4 months," Richard said. "That's right. She doesn't bring people home." "I know. Do you know why?" Noah looked at his cup. "I have some ideas. I'd rather hear yours." Richard's expression shifted just slightly, the way a man's face shifts when someone says the thing he wasn't expecting. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Noah with new calibration. "She's been running since she was 22 years old, Richard said. "Running the company, running the strategy, running every relationship she's ever been in like it was a project with a deadline." He paused. "Her mother and we don't know how to reach her anymore. She comes home for holidays. She asks the right questions. She remembers every detail we've ever told her, and she brings it back perfectly like she studied for the visit." He stopped, something heavy in his voice. "But she stopped letting us see the parts that are hard." Noah didn't say anything. "You know what she was like as a kid?" Richard picked up his coffee. "Fearless. Not the performing kind of fearless, the real kind. She'd take apart every appliance in the house just to see how it worked. She asked her 3rd-grade teacher why long division existed if calculators did it faster, and she wasn't being difficult. She genuinely wanted to know." He smiled without meaning to. Somewhere along the way she learned that questions were vulnerabilities. "Someone taught her that," Noah said. Richard looked at him. "People don't learn to hide their questions on their own. Someone made it costly for her." Noah met the older man's eyes. "I'm not asking who. I'm just saying whatever closed her down, it wasn't a decision she made because she wanted to be closed." Richard Cross was quiet for a long time. Outside, a bird landed on the dock railing and considered the lake. "You fix things for a living," Richard said. "I do. Can you fix people?" "No," Noah said. "But sometimes you can hand them the right tool and get out of the way." Richard looked at him for another long moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup and stood. "The boathouse has an inboard that's been running rough since April. 3 different marine techs looked at it." He moved toward the back door. "You interested?" Noah was already standing. They spent 2 hours in the boathouse. Richard handed him tools without being asked for them, which meant he knew what the tools were and what came next. And Noah adjusted his rhythm accordingly. The particular call and response of 2 people who work with their hands and don't need to narrate the process. The problem turned out to be a cracked distributor cap that 2 of the 3 previous techs had missed because they'd been looking at the fuel system. Noah found it in 11 minutes. He spent the remaining time replacing it properly and checking everything adjacent to it because that was how you worked. Richard watched him do it. Where'd you learn? My father's shop. Started handing him tools when I was about 5. Had my first real repair solo at 12. Noah torqued the last bolt. He died when I was 26. Left me the shop and a mortgage on it. Hard way to inherit a business. Harder way to lose a father. He set the wrench down. But the shop kept me honest. You can't fake your way through an engine. It either runs or it doesn't. Richard made a sound that might have been a laugh. I said almost exactly that once. About the hardware business. He leaned against the workbench. People think distribution is just logistics. It's not. Every product that moves through my warehouse either works or it doesn't. You can market anything. You cannot market function. No, sir. My son-in-law Vivian's ex-brother-in-law, rather her sister's ex-husband, he was in marketing. Lovely man. Complete disaster. Couldn't understand why beautiful packaging didn't fix a broken product. Richard picked up a socket wrench and turned it over in his hands the way men do when they're thinking and need something to hold. I've been suspicious of men who sell things I can't touch ever since. I understand that. Do you? Noah looked at him. You're suspicious of me. Richard set the wrench down. I'm observing you. Same difference at the start. Richard almost smiled. At the start, he conceded. Noah started the engine. It ran clean, and even the particular sound of a well-tuned inboard, doing exactly what it was designed to do, effortless and certain. Richard closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he heard it, the reflex of a man who recognized the sound of something working the way it should. You're good at this, Richard said. It's all I'm good at. I doubt that. Richard turned toward the boathouse door. Come fishing with me tomorrow morning, 5:30. I'll be up. Richard nodded once and walked out into the morning light. Noah listened to the engine run for another minute before he shut it off. He thought about Sophie. She would have asked Richard approximately 40 questions by now. She would have wanted to know the fish species in the lake by name, and whether the dock was structurally sound, and what year the boathouse was built, and whether the engine problem was interesting or boring. He missed her with the specific ache of a parent who is somewhere else when their kid is doing something worth seeing. He pulled out his phone. Miss you. How's Grandma? 3 minutes later, she made me eat oatmeal with raisins, which I hate, as you know. Dad, are there fish in the lake where you are? He smiled. Yes. What kind? I'll find out and report back. Okay. Also, I found your old Navy jacket in the closet and I'm wearing it. It's huge on me. Grandma took a picture. Don't stretch the sleeves. Too late. Love you. Also, the dog question is still open. He put the phone away. He walked out of the boathouse into a morning that was already warmer than the one before it, and found Vivian standing on the dock in a gray sweater, coffee in hand, looking at the water with the expression of a woman who had been up longer than anyone knew. He walked out to her. She heard him coming and didn't turn around. My father came back inside humming, she said. He hasn't hummed in that boathouse in 2 years. Engine's fixed. I know, he told me. She turned her cup in her hands. He told me you talked. We did. What about work, fathers, engines? He stood beside her. You a little. She looked at him sideways. What did you say? That someone made it costly for you to ask questions. That it wasn't your choice to close down. He looked at the water. He didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. He already knew. She was quiet for a moment. The lake moved. Something under the surface shifted, and a ring of ripples spread out from the center, widening, thinning, going still. You shouldn't have said that. Probably not. It wasn't your story to tell. I didn't tell a story. I made an observation. He looked at her. There's a difference. She pressed her lips together. He could see her running through the argument, the controlled logical version where she explained why he'd overstepped, where she recalibrated the terms of their agreement to include boundaries around personal disclosure. He could see her building it, and then he watched her let it go. Not because she'd decided he was right, Because she was too tired to be strategic about it at 6:30 in the morning on a dock where nobody was watching. He liked you, she said quietly. I know. That's not a small thing. He doesn't like most people I've brought here. How many people have you brought here? A pause. You're the first. He let that sit. I'm the first because you paid me to come. You're the first, she said, because I trust you enough to lie with you in the same room as the people I love, which is a different kind of trust than I give most people, and that... She stopped herself, took a breath. That's a strange sentence to have to say out loud. Little bit, he agreed. She almost laughed. It didn't quite make it out, but he heard the edge of it, and it was more real than anything he'd seen from her yet. Graham is going to try something today, she said. I can feel it. I know. He's been too quiet. Quiet men who want things are either patient or they're waiting for an audience. Noah looked back at the house. He's going to wait for dinner, when everyone's together and the wine's been poured and the conversation's soft enough that something sharp will cut through it. She looked at him. You've met men like him before. I've met people who use social settings as weapons. It's not complicated once you know what you're looking at. He finished his coffee. When he does it, don't look at me. Don't check whether I'm handling it. Just... He paused. Just be where you are. I'll be where I am. And where will you be? He considered it honestly. Wherever I need to be to make sure he doesn't land. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that the sun moved a little on the water. Long enough that something she'd been holding behind her collarbone, he could almost see it shifted. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not the job. Not the arrangement. She meant the extra. The fishing with her father. The coffee calibration. The dock conversation at 6:30 a.m. He thought about giving her the honest answer, which was that he didn't entirely know that he had come here for $15,000 and a repaired roof, and instead found himself caring about people he'd known for 36 hours in ways he hadn't planned for or budgeted. Because you're paying me to be your boyfriend, he said. And your boyfriend would be doing all of this. She studied him, deciding whether to accept that answer. She didn't fully accept it, but she let it stand. Come inside, she said. Helen's making breakfast, and if you're not at the table, she'll send someone to find you, and that someone will be Helen herself, which is not a gentle experience. Noted. He followed her back up the dock. Behind them, the lake settled. The ripples were long gone. Graham found his audience at dinner exactly as Noah had predicted. The table seated 10. Helen had cooked something she called her anniversary roast, which was the meal she made every year for the week of their anniversary, because Richard had said in year 2 that it was the best thing he'd ever eaten, and she had taken that seriously for 4 decades. 2 family friends, Bill and Carolyn Marsh, had joined them. A cousin of Helen's named Patrice, who had opinions about everything and stated them without invitation. And Graham, who had spent the day being helpful in the particular way of men who are building toward something. He had helped Helen carry things. He had complimented Richard's boat collection. He had been pleasant and low volume and patient, and Noah had watched him the way you watch an engine that sounds fine but is reading hot. Dinner was warm and easy at first. Bill Marsh told a story about a fishing tournament that had gone wrong in the specific way that fishing stories always went wrong, and Patrice corrected 3 of his details with the confidence of someone who had not been present. Richard poured wine. Helen beamed at her roast, and then Graham said with the gentle, curious tone of a man asking something innocent, Noah, I've been meaning to ask, what does marine engine repair actually look like as a business? Is there real growth in that space, or is it more of a lifestyle business? The table didn't stop, but it quieted slightly the way a room quiets when it senses a test being administered. Noah set his fork down. Not quickly, not defensively. He just set it down and looked at Graham with the calm of a man who had nothing to prove. Depends what you mean by growth. If you mean revenue scaling year over year with margin expansion and a path to acquisition. He picked up his wine glass. Then no, it's not that kind of business. So it's a lifestyle business. It's a real business. It employs 3 people. It services clients in 4 counties, and it keeps working boats working, which matters to the people whose livelihoods depend on those boats. Whether that counts as growth depends on what you think business is for. Graham smiled. It was a very good smile. Fair point. I suppose I think about it in terms of scalability. I know you do. Something shifted in Graham's expression. Just a fraction. What's interesting, Noah continued in the same easy tone, is that the businesses that scale fastest are often the most fragile. I've repaired engines on boats owned by men who built companies worth 8 figures and had to sell them in bad markets. The shop my father built, the one I'm running now, has been operating for 31 years. It survived 2 recessions and a flood. He looked at Graham. Scalability is one metric. Durability is another. I've always been more interested in things that last. He picked his fork back up. The table was quiet for exactly 1 beat. Then Bill Marsh said, "I'll drink to that," and did, and the moment passed, and Richard Cross looked at Noah from the end of the table with an expression that was no longer observation. It was respect. Graham picked up his wine glass. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes did. Just slightly. Just enough for someone paying attention to see the recalculation happening behind them. Noah noticed. He kept eating, across the table. Vivian was looking at her roast. She had not looked at Noah. She had not checked on him or telegraphed anything toward him. She was exactly where he'd told her to be. The call came at 9:47 that night. Noah was sitting on the porch steps when his phone rang, and he saw the name and answered before the second ring. Soph? Dad. Her voice had the particular texture of a night call, quieter than usual, a little slower. I can't sleep. What's going on? Nothing. A small pause. I had a dream about Mom. He was quiet for a moment. Good dream or hard dream? Both. She was in this kitchen, and she was making pancakes, and I knew in the dream that she was going to leave soon, but she didn't know that I knew, and I was trying to memorize everything. Her voice was steady. She was 8 years old, and she talked about her mother the way old people talk about weather, with acceptance and grief, and a kind of hard-won practicality that broke Noah's heart every single time. What were her pancakes like? I can't remember anymore. Blueberry, always from scratch. She said the box mix was a personal insult. Sophie made a small sound that might have been a laugh. That sounds right. She put way too many blueberries in. They'd fall apart when you tried to flip them. She'd get annoyed at herself every time, like the blueberries were doing it on purpose. Did they taste good? Best pancakes I ever had. A long pause. Dad, do you think she would have liked, Sophie stopped. Restarted. Do you think she would have been okay with you? Another stop. With me what? I don't know, with things being different than they were. He heard it. The question behind the question, the careful 8-year-old way of asking whether loving anything new was a betrayal of everything old. Yeah, he said. I think she would have been okay with a lot of things if it meant you were taken care of and I wasn't sad all the time. Sophie was quiet. I'm not sad all the time, she said. Just sometimes. Me too. Okay. A breath. Okay, that's okay. The way she said it 3 times, like she was confirming something with herself. I'm gonna try to sleep. Good. Dad? Yeah. Tell me something about where you are. He looked at the lake, the way it held the moonlight, the sound of it alive and dark and patient, not asking anything of anyone. I'm sitting on the back steps of a house on a lake, he said. It's quiet. There are stars. The water sounds like it's breathing. That's nice. It is. Okay, good night. Good night, Soph. I love you. Love you too. Also the dog question. Is still open, I know. Go to sleep. He heard her smile through the phone before she ended the call. That specific sound, the warmth of it, the particular frequency of Sophie Bennett content enough to sleep, was the thing he carried back inside with him. He didn't notice Vivienne in the hallway until he nearly walked into her. She was in a cardigan now, hair down, a glass of water in one hand. She looked at him with an expression that had none of the composure she wore in daylight. I heard you come in, she said. I wasn't eavesdropping. I know. She looked at her glass. Is she okay? She had a dream about her mother. He said it simply the way you say true things when you're too tired for gentleness to be complicated. She's okay. She just needed to hear my voice. Vivian looked at him then. Not the assessing look she used in negotiations. Something more unguarded than that, something that had no strategy in it at all. How old was Sophie when? 3, almost 4. She doesn't really remember, but she remembers feelings. She remembers what it was like to have a mother, even if she can't access the specific memories. He leaned against the wall. Sometimes I think that's harder. You can't miss what you remember. You can only miss the shape of what's gone. Vivian was very still. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For not asking about her sooner. I mean before this week. When you told me about her, I made it about logistics. About whether she'd be a complication. She looked at her water glass. She's not a complication. She's your whole life. She is. She's extraordinary. The way she just... Vivian paused, and something in her voice changed. Something raw came into it that she didn't seem to have planned for. The way she walked into this house and just decided what was real and what wasn't in about 20 minutes. A small, wondering sound. I've never been able to do that. You can learn it. Can you? He thought about it honestly. I think some people come with it, and some people have to build it. Sophie came with it. I built it. He looked at her. You're still building. She absorbed that, the way she absorbed most true things without flinching, but not without feeling it. I should let you sleep, she said. Probably. She moved to pass him in the narrow hallway, and they were close for a second. The unavoidable close of a tight space. 2 people, no performance required. She smelled like something clean, and a little like the lake, the way everything in the house smelled after a day near water. She stopped. Noah. Yeah. At dinner. She looked up at him. You didn't need me to rescue you. No. Most people. She stopped. Most people I've dated needed rescuing. Or they needed to rescue me. It was always... She moved her thumb along the edge of her water glass, once the small private motion he'd catalogued at the diner. It was always one direction. That's not a relationship, he said. That's a rescue operation. She looked at him for a moment. A long, quiet moment, where the hallway held them both, and the house slept around them, and neither of them moved toward anything or away from it. Good night, Noah. Good night, Vivian. She went upstairs. He stood in the hallway for a moment after she was gone, listening to the house settle, listening to the lake outside the window, listening to the particular silence of a place that was holding more than it let on. Then he went to bed. Sophie arrived on day 4. It was not the plan. Noah got the call from his neighbor, Mrs. Garrett, at 7:15 in the morning. His mother-in-law, Patty, had taken a fall reaching for something on a high shelf. Not serious. No broken bones. But shaken, bruised, and unable to drive, and Sophie had already been up for an hour and had already made herself breakfast and was handling the situation with the particular composure of a child who had learned early that composure was what the adults needed from her. She's fine, Mrs. Garrett said. But I've got my own appointment in Raleigh, and I can't stay all day, and I didn't want to send her to school without you know. I'll come get her. Noah, it's 3 hours. I'll be there by 10:30. He was already reaching for his jacket when Vivian appeared in the kitchen doorway. You heard. The walls in this house are original construction. They're not thick. She crossed her arm over her chest, not defensively thinking. Don't drive 3 hours and back. Bring her here. He looked at her. I know that wasn't the plan, she said quickly. I know the arrangement doesn't include Vivian. She stopped. Are you sure? Something moved through her expression. A flash of the thing she always moved her thumb for when it arrived. And then she steadied. She needs to be somewhere safe. This is a safe place. She met his eyes. Bring her here. He held her gaze for a moment, looking for the calculation, looking for the angle. There wasn't one. He called Mrs. Garrett back. Sophie arrived at 2 in the afternoon in the back of a rideshare. Noah had arranged from Briar Glen with her backpack, her nebulizer case, her library book, and strong opinions about the length of the trip. She climbed out of the car, looked at the lake estate with the expression of a scientist encountering interesting data and said, "It's bigger than I thought. Also, is that a real dock or a decorative one?" "Real," Noah said. "Can I fish off it?" "You'd have to ask Richard." "Who's Richard?" "You'll figure it out." Sophie hoisted her backpack and walked up the path toward the house. Helen Cross opened the front door before Sophie reached the porch, and the two of them regarded each other with the mutual seriousness of people who intended to get along, but were not willing to pretend the assessment wasn't happening. "You must be Sophie," Helen said. "You must be Helen," Sophie said. "My dad says you're a good cook, but he was describing you to someone on the phone, and he said you're also sharp as a tack, which I looked up and it means you're clever. Is that accurate?" Helen blinked once. Then she smiled, the real one, the one Richard could still make happen after 40 years. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you the kitchen." Sophie looked back at Noah once. He gave her nothing. Kept his face neutral because she needed to do this herself, and she knew it. She turned back around and followed Helen inside. Noah exhaled. Vivian was standing behind him. "She's terrifying," Vivian said quietly. "Told you." She assessed Helen in 9 seconds. 8 usually. Helen's interesting, so she took longer. He heard Sophie's voice from inside the house, already asking about the pots hanging from the kitchen rack, already curious, already completely herself in a space she'd never been before. The particular gift of a child who moved through the world without performing anything. Vivian watched the door she'd disappeared through. "She looks like you," Vivian said. "She looks like her mother." A pause. "She has your eyes." He looked at Vivian sideways. She wasn't looking at him. She was still looking at the door. "What's her asthma protocol?" she asked. He turned to face her fully now. "Green inhaler every morning. Blue one rescue only. Nebulizer if she says her chest feels tight, she'll tell you she doesn't hide it anymore. Avoid chalk dust, cat dander, and extreme cold." He paused. "Also, she's allergic to self-pity. Gets very impatient with it." The corner of Vivian's mouth moved. "Noted. You don't have to manage it," he said. "She manages herself pretty well." "I know, I just—" She stopped, turned to look at him. "I want to know. If I'm going to be in the same house as her for 3 days, I want to know what matters to her." Something in his chest shifted. Not dramatically, just moved, like a part that had been sitting slightly wrong settling into alignment. "Her inhaler's in the blue case in my bag," he said. "Top zipper." She nodded. "And she takes her tea with too much honey, which she'll lie about if you're not watching the jar." Vivian almost laughed. Almost. What happened over the next 48 hours was not something Noah could have scripted, because no script would have been credible enough. Sophie decided that Richard was interesting within the first hour, and told him so directly, which made Richard so surprised that he laughed for the first time all week without occasion. By the second morning she was sitting in the boathouse with him, learning the names of the engine parts which she memorized with the same ease she memorized everything, and Richard was explaining fuel injection with the thoroughness of a man who had found a student worthy of the material. Helen taught her to make pie crust. Sophie taught Helen the correct names of all 15 species of freshwater fish, native to North Carolina lakes. They got along. Noah observed the way people get along when they recognize something similar in each other. A directness, an absence of pretense, a preference for doing over discussing. Graham watched all of this with the particular stillness of a man recalculating, and Vivian moved carefully at first, cautiously, the way someone moves around something they don't want to break. Sophie noticed. She noticed everything. On the second evening, Sophie came to find Vivian in the sitting room, where Vivian was answering emails on her laptop with the focused intensity of someone who had been without connectivity for too long. Sophie sat down on the couch beside her. Vivian looked up. "Do you want something?" "No," Sophie said. "I'm just sitting here." Vivian looked at her laptop, looked back at Sophie. "Okay. You look at my dad like you're trying to figure out what he wants." Vivian set the laptop on the cushion beside her. "What did you mean?" "Like you're waiting for him to want something. Like you don't trust that he's just—" Sophie considered the word. There. Sophie. He's just there. That's how he is. He doesn't want anything except to fix the thing that needs fixing and make sure everyone's okay. She pulled her knees up to her chest and looked at Vivian with those eyes. Noah's eyes. Natalie's eyes. Some particular combination that had ended up in this specific 8-year-old with more accuracy than either parent. He looks at you like he's already decided you're worth it. Vivian was very still. Why are you telling me this? Sophie shrugged. Because you look scared. And usually when adults look scared, they're scared of the wrong thing. A long silence. What's the right thing to be scared of? Vivian asked. Sophie thought about it. Genuinely thought about it the way she thought about everything. Missing it, she said. My dad says the only thing that's actually sad is having something real and not noticing it until it's gone. She picked up her library book from beside her. He doesn't say it like a lecture. He just says it sometimes when he thinks I'm not listening. She opened the book. But I'm always listening. Vivian looked at the girl beside her. Reading now done with the conversation completely comfortable in the silence she had created. She looked at her laptop. The 17 unread emails. The acquisition update. The board communication that needed a response. She closed the laptop. Sophie. Would you show me how to set up the nebulizer? I want to know how to do it correctly. Sophie looked up from her book. Looked at Vivian with the 8-year-old version of a full diagnostic scan. Yeah, she said. Okay. She got up and went to get the case. Vivian followed her. And that was the moment. Not dramatic, not announced, not scripted. Anywhere in the folder Vivian had brought to Richmond with 37 questions and a laminated timeline, that was the moment something in Vivian Cross quietly, irrevocably changed. That night was the third night. Noah found Vivian alone by the lake at 11, which was where she'd been the night before, and the night before that, and he was starting to understand that the lake was where she went when she ran out of management strategies. He sat beside her on the end of the dock, not too close, not far. She asked you about the nebulizer, he said. I asked her. I know. She told me. Vivian looked at the water. She's extraordinary. I know. She told me I was scared of the wrong thing. What did you say? I asked her what the right thing to be scared of was. A pause. She said missing it. He was quiet. She sounds like you when she talks, Vivian said. Like someone who learned to say the true thing instead of the easy thing. I learned it late. She came with it. From her mother. From both of us, I think. He looked at the water. Natalie she didn't have patience for anything that wasn't real. She said life was too short for polite dishonesty, and she meant it. He paused. She was sick for 3 years before she died. By the end, everything unnecessary had burned off. Just the real stuff left. His voice was even. He'd made peace with most of it. Not all. Sophie was with us through that. She absorbed it. I'm sorry, Vivian said. Not the reflexive kind. The kind that knew it wasn't enough and said it anyway. Thank you. They sat with the water for a while. I was engaged to Graham for 18 months, she said. Not building to it, just putting it in the air between them. I thought he saw me. Not the company, not the asset, not the CEO me. He was the first person since my father who made me feel like being smart was a thing someone could love instead of tolerate. She pressed her lips together. He was taking notes the entire time. He had a file, an actual file. Contact lists, access credentials, internal projections. Things I'd trusted him with. Things you trust someone with when you think you're going to spend your life with them. Noah didn't say anything. When I found out, it wasn't anger at first. It was... She stopped. Her hand moved to the dock railing. She held it. It was the realization that I had been wrong about everything I was most certain about my judgment, about what I deserved, about what love was supposed to feel like. She looked at the water. I closed off a lot after that, and I told myself it was professionalism or strategy or self-protection. But really, it was just a breath. I just stopped trusting what I felt. Vivienne. She looked at him, You trusted your instincts about your father, about your mother, about Sophie. He met her eyes. You still have them. You just stopped applying them to yourself. She looked at him for a long time. The lake moved around them. The stars held still. This wasn't supposed to happen, she said quietly. I know. This was supposed to be a week, a controlled situation, a solution to a specific problem. I know. You were supposed to be a mechanic from Briar Glen who needed a roof repaired. She almost laughed. It didn't quite get out. But it was closer than before. What do we do? She asked. He thought about that honestly. I don't know, he said. But I think we start by stopping pretending we're pretending. She looked at him. And then quietly, with no audience and no script and no strategic calculation, Vivian Cross leaned forward and kissed him. Brief. Certain. Real in the way that the realest things are unexpected, unplanned, and impossible to take back once they've happened. She pulled back and looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. The lake breathed around them. I still don't know what we do, he said finally. Neither do I. A pause. But I'd like to figure it out. He looked at the water. At the dock. At the house behind them where his daughter was asleep and her parents were asleep, and a man named Graham Whitmore was almost certainly not asleep, almost certainly calculating his next move. He reached over and took her hand. Not a gesture, not a signal for anyone to see, just a decision, a small, private, irreversible one. She held it. They sat there until the temperature dropped and the stars shifted, and the lake stopped performing anything, and was simply itself, dark and full, and holding everything that had been given to it, without making any promises about what it would do next. Which Noah thought was about as honest as anything could be. The morning after the dock, nothing was different, and everything was. Noah made coffee. Richard came downstairs, and they talked about the fish count in the lake versus 10 years ago. Helen made eggs. Sophie ate 3 of them and asked whether bald eagles ever landed on the dock, because she'd read they were common near lakes in the Carolinas, and she wanted to see one. Ordinary things. Surface things. But underneath all of it, something had shifted in the molecular structure of the house. The way it does when 2 people have said something true to each other in the dark and have to figure out how to carry it in the daylight. Vivian came downstairs composed. She always came downstairs composed. But Noah noticed because he was always noticing now, because that was the problem he had walked himself into. That she poured her coffee and stood at the counter instead of sitting at the table, and the distance between her and every other person in the kitchen was exactly the same. Measured. Maintained. Except when Sophie asked her to pass the honey, and she did it without thinking, without the half-second of calculation she used for everything else, just reached out and handed it over, like someone who had been passing honey to this specific child for years. Sophie noticed. She didn't say anything. But she noticed because she noticed everything. Graham noticed too. He came down at 9 later than anyone else, already dressed like he had a meeting. He looked at the table. At Noah. At Vivian. At the way they occupied the same room without signaling anything at each other. And something behind his eyes went very still. Noah watched him decide. Whatever Graham had been waiting for, he had just moved his timeline up. The discovery happened by accident, the way most important things do, after breakfast. Richard asked Noah to check the secondary generator in the boathouse. The estate had lost power twice during the previous winter's storms, and Richard wanted a second opinion on whether the backup system was reliable. Noah spent the better part of the morning in the boathouse with a multimeter and a flashlight working through the electrical panel tracing circuits, the satisfying methodical work of finding out whether something was actually sound or just appeared to be. He found the generator problem in 40 minutes. A corroded connection on the transfer switch. Simple. He fixed it and kept moving through the system because that was how he worked. You didn't stop at the problem you were looking for. You checked everything adjacent. That was when he found the terminal. It was built into the back wall of the boathouse, partly behind a shelving unit, the kind of installation that didn't announce itself. A hardwired network connection, active with an indicator light that should not have been green on an estate that primarily used residential internet. Noah looked at it for a long time. He pulled out his phone and took 3 photographs of the terminal, the indicator light, the cable routing behind the shelf. He wasn't a network engineer, but he'd wired enough equipment in his shop to understand when something had been deliberately hidden rather than simply installed out of the way. He went back to the house and found Vivian in the small office off the sitting room where she'd been working every morning with the door half closed. He knocked once and came in and closed the door behind him. She looked up from her laptop with the expression she used when she was in the middle of something, then read his face, and the expression changed. What happened? He put his phone on the desk in front of her and showed her the photographs. She looked at the first one, then the second, then the third, and on the third one, he watched the blood leave her face, not dramatically, not a collapse, just a quiet draining, like the temperature had dropped 5 degrees in the space of a breath. That's a crosswave network architecture, she said. I thought so. The cable labeling. That specific routing is our internal backup architecture. It's proprietary. She zoomed in on the third photograph with 2 fingers studying it the way she studied everything completely, without rushing, without letting herself feel it yet. This connects to our primary acquisition documents. How long has it been active? I don't know. I need to check the access logs remotely. She was already turning back to her laptop, already opening a remote connection, already. 3 steps into solving the problem before she'd finished processing what the problem was. Then she stopped, looked at the photographs again. Graham has been coming here for 2 years, she said, not asking, working it out. Has he been here when you weren't? She looked at him. My parents trust him. He visits them. Her jaw tightened slightly. He's been here at least 4 times in the last 18 months without me. So he had access to the boathouse. He had access to everything. My parents. She stopped. A breath in, a breath out. They invited him. They trust him because I never told them why the engagement ended. As far as they know, he's just... Her voice was very level. The level of someone holding something heavy very carefully. He's just a man they like. Vivian. She looked at him. Check the access logs. Find out what was taken and when. Then we figure out the next step. The next step is calling my security director and... The next step is knowing exactly what we're dealing with before we move. If you tip your hand before you know the full extent of it, he'll destroy what he can and deny the rest. Noah held her gaze. When? She understood. The access records will tell me the dates. I can cross-reference them against the estate visitor log my mother keeps. She writes down every guest, every date she always has. Your mother keeps a visitor log. She calls it her hospitality journal. She writes down who came, what she cooked for them, whether they had dietary restrictions. Vivian's voice shifted slightly. She's been writing in it for 20 years. Then we have a paper trail. She looked at him for a moment with something that was not quite gratitude and not quite wonder, but lived somewhere near both of them. You're very calm, she said. I'm not calm, I'm focused. They're different things. He picked up his phone from the desk. Check the logs. I'll stay close today. Don't change anything you're doing, no different behavior, no signals. If Graham's watching, he needs to see an ordinary day. And tonight, we know what we know. She turned back to her laptop. He went to the door, then stopped. Vivian, when this is over, whatever the logs show, whatever happens, your parents are going to need to know the truth. All of it. She was already typing. She didn't look up. I know. Not the version that protects them, the real one. A pause in the typing. I know Noah. He left her to it. The rest of that day was the longest of Noah's life, and he had lived through days that earned that description. He kept his routine. He took Sophie fishing off the dock with Richard after lunch. Sophie caught one small bass, released it with ceremony, and declared the experience both peaceful and overrated, which Richard found so funny he had to sit down. Noah baited hooks and watched the house and watched Graham, who appeared on the porch twice during the afternoon, both times on his phone, both times looking at the lake with the particular focused attention of a man who had stopped watching the scenery and started watching the clock. At 3:15, Noah's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Vivian. One line. 17 unauthorized access events. Earliest 14 months ago. Most recent 3 days before we arrived. He put the phone back in his pocket without changing his expression. Sophie looked at him. You okay? Yeah. He handed her the rod. Your turn. I already had a turn. Have another one. She took the rod with the air of someone accepting a task below her pay grade, but willing to be gracious about it. Richard looked at Noah across Sophie's head. He'd been watching Noah's face when the phone buzzed. He didn't say anything, but his eyes asked. Noah gave him a small, honest shake of his head. Not now. Richard turned back to the water. Graham made his move that evening. Noah had known it was coming. He'd felt the pressure building all day the way you feel, a system pressure rising in a sealed chamber. No sound, no visual indicator, just a physical certainty that something is approaching its limit. Helen had set the table for the anniversary dinner. Real china. Candles. The meal she'd been planning for weeks. Richard's favorite, the one she made when she wanted to say something without saying it out loud. The room held 30 years of family inside it. The specific weight of people who had been eating at the same table long enough that the chairs knew their shapes. Graham waited until the main course. He waited until Richard had poured wine, and Helen had passed the bread, and Sophie had started a conversation about the structural integrity of the boathouse that made Richard laugh, and the table was warm and relaxed, and full of exactly the kind of human ease that makes people feel safe. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a document on the table. It took Noah 1 second to understand what it was. It took Vivian 3. The room went from warm to very quiet in the space of that understanding. The document was a copy of their original agreement. Vivian's signature, Noah's name, the figure, the terms. 7 days, $15,000, a list of specific conditions. I think, Graham said in the pleasant, measured voice of a man who had rehearsed this, that everyone at this table deserves to know how this relationship actually began. Helen looked at the document, then at Vivian. Her face did something complicated and careful, the face of a woman who was not going to react until she understood everything, but whose understanding was already doing damage. Richard looked at Noah. Not accusatory. Not yet. Just looking. The particular look of a man who has trusted his own judgment about another person and is waiting to find out whether he was right. Sophie looked at her father. Noah looked at her first. His daughter, who had been to this place and met these people and decided they were real, who had taught Vivian the nebulizer and told her she was scared of the wrong thing, and taken her hand in the kitchen on the second morning without anyone asking her to. He looked at her for 1 second, and what he put in his face was the only thing he had that was entirely unambiguous. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Wait. Sophie held it, pressed her lips together, waited. Graham was still talking. Something about transparency, about the family's right to know about the nature of paid arrangements, and what they said about character. His voice was warm and concerned, the voice of a man performing reluctant honesty. Richard hadn't moved. Helen had put down her fork. Vivian was very still. Noah watched her. Watched the moment when her instincts kicked in, the ones she'd built over years of crisis management. The ones that said, contain the damage, protect the company, sacrifice anything that can't be controlled. He watched her start to reach for that mode, the way someone reaches for a familiar tool, because they know how it works even when it isn't the right one. And then Graham turned to her and said pleasantly, all you have to do is confirm the arrangement, step away from whatever this is, and we can manage the fallout together, quietly, like adults. The table held its breath. Vivian opened her mouth. Noah spoke first. He's right. Every head turned to him. He set down his fork. He looked at Richard, at Helen, at Sophie, and then at Graham. The agreement is real. Vivian hired me 7 days ago to come here as her boyfriend. She paid me $15,000. The terms are exactly what's on that paper. Helen made a small sound. Richard's face had gone very still. I want to be clear about something, Noah continued. His voice was even, not apologetic, not defensive, Just honest the way he was honest with customers when an engine had a problem they didn't want to hear about. I came here for the money. I have a shop with a hole in the roof and a daughter with medical bills and a mortgage that's 3 months behind. $15,000 is the difference between keeping everything I've built and losing it. He looked at Richard. That's the truth. I'm not going to dress it up. The table was absolutely silent. What I won't say. He looked at Graham. What I won't stand here and let you suggest is that everything that happened this week was part of that agreement, because it wasn't. He looked at Helen. Nobody paid me to sit in the boathouse with Richard for 2 hours talking about his father's hardware roots. Nobody paid me to learn that you do a Cary Grant impression that Richard has been laughing at for 40 years. Nobody paid me to watch your daughter figure out how to hand my child a glass of water without making her feel handled. He let that settle. And nobody paid me to fall in love with her. Graham laughed a short, controlled sound. That's a very moving speech from a man who accepted money to perform emotion. It is, Noah said. But it's also true, which is one thing your speech doesn't have the same problem with Graham. Excuse me, you brought that document out because you've been watching this week fall apart for you. Noah looked at him steadily. Not because of anything I did. Because Vivian stopped looking at you the way you needed her to look at you to make your plan work. He tilted his head slightly. What's the plan exactly? Because I found something in the boathouse today that I think everyone here should know about. The temperature in Graham's face changed. It was fast. He controlled it fast, but not fast enough. I don't know what you think you found. A hardwired terminal connected to Crosswave's internal backup network, Noah said. Built into the back wall, active. I have photographs. He looked at Vivian. She spent this afternoon pulling the access logs remotely. 17 unauthorized access events. The earliest one was 14 months ago. The most recent was 3 days before we arrived. Richard looked at Graham. Helen looked at Graham. And Graham looked at the space between his options and found it smaller than he'd planned for. That terminal is a standard backup of her jacket. She'd had the folder since 3 o'clock, since she'd printed the access summary on the estate's printer, and held it all afternoon, and she placed it on the table. Her voice when she finally spoke was the quietest thing in the room. The access logs show that our internal acquisition files were accessed from the estate's hardwired connection 14 times in the last year. Each access correlates with a date in my mother's hospitality journal dates when Graham was a guest here, and I was not. She looked at her parents. He's been using your home, your trust, your guest list. A breath. He's been leaking acquisition data to his investment group. When the data is complete, they short our stock, trigger a liquidity crisis, and move to acquire controlling interest at a fraction of real value. She laid the access summary beside Graham's document. Both pieces of paper on the same table. One a weapon he'd brought. One the evidence he hadn't known she had. Graham looked at the summary. He looked at the photographs Noah had printed that afternoon. He looked at the visitor log correlation, 5 months of his own visits documented in Helen Cross's careful decades-old handwriting, dates and meals and notes about whether the weather was good for the dock. He stood up. I'm not going to sit here and... Sit down. Richard Cross's voice was something Noah had not heard from him before. Not loud, lower than loud, and far more final. Sit down. Graham sat. Richard looked at the documents on the table. He looked at them the way he'd looked at Noah's engine work on the first morning, completely, without rushing, without letting himself react until he understood everything. Then he looked up at his daughter. Vivian. Dad, how long have you known about what he did during the engagement? She held her father's eyes. Since the engagement ended. A long silence. And you didn't tell us. I didn't want to. She stopped, started again. You trusted him. You liked him. I didn't want to take that from you. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through his face that Noah didn't look away from because it was the face of a man doing something difficult in real time, holding two things at once. The anger at the betrayal and the grief of understanding why his daughter had carried it alone for 4 years. That wasn't your decision to make, Richard said. I know. You should have trusted us. I know, Dad. Helen had not said anything. She was looking at Graham with an expression that was not anger and not grief, and not anything that required a name. Just a woman who had cooked for this man welcomed him into her home, written his visits in her journal, in the same careful hand she used for family, understanding what that had meant to him. "Get out of my house," Helen said. Graham looked at her. "Tonight," she said. "Right now. Before I have to look at you again." He started to speak. "Don't." Her voice was even. Final. The voice of a woman who had been patient with a great many things for a great many years and had simply run out. "Don't say anything to me." Graham pushed back his chair. What happened next was fast. He reached across the table for the access summary, Noah's photographs, the printed logs, the evidence, and he grabbed for them with both hands. And Sophie, who had been very still in her chair, made a sharp sound, and Noah was already moving. He caught Graham's wrist before the papers cleared the table. Not a tackle, not a fight, just a grip. Certain and complete, the grip of a man who worked with his hands every day and knew exactly how much pressure the situation required and used precisely that much. Graham shoved with his free arm and connected with Noah's shoulder, and Noah absorbed it, kept his feet, kept his grip, and said very quietly, "Don't." One word. Graham looked at him, at the grip on his wrist, at Noah's face, which was not angry, which was in fact very calm. The specific calm of a man who has made a decision and is simply executing it. He stopped. Noah took the papers off the table with his free hand and passed them behind him without looking, and Vivian took them. Then he released Graham's wrist and stepped back. Graham straightened his jacket. He looked at the room, at Richard in his chair, at Helen with her hands folded, at Vivian, holding the documents, at Sophie, who was watching him with 8-year-old eyes that had no performance in them at all, just clear and direct and utterly unimpressed. He walked out. Richard got up without a word and went to the front door, and Noah heard the specific sound of a man standing in his own doorway until he heard a car start and pull down the gravel drive. The room breathed. Sophie slid out of her chair and crossed to Noah and stood beside him. She didn't hug him. She just stood close, her shoulder against his arm, the way she did when she was making sure he was still there. He put his hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he said, quiet. "Yeah." A pause. Yeah." Helen was still at the table. She was looking at the candles, which had been burning through all of it, and were still burning as if the dinner had not been detonated in the middle of its best course. Vivian sat down beside her mother. She didn't offer a speech, didn't explain or recalibrate or manage. She just sat down and put her hand over her mother's on the tablecloth. Helen looked at their hands, then at her daughter's face. "Why didn't you tell us?" Not accusatory, genuinely asking. The question of a mother who needed to understand where she had been, that her child decided to carry something this heavy alone. "Because you were happy," Vivian said. "You believed in people. You made his favorite dinner and wrote his visits in your journal, and I didn't want to be the reason you stopped doing that." A breath. "I thought I was protecting you, baby." Helen's voice broke just slightly. "We're your parents. You don't protect us from things that hurt you. That's backwards." Vivian's composure held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then it didn't. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the collapse of a woman who had been performing strength. It was something quieter and realer than that, the release of someone who had been carrying a specific weight for a specific number of years, and had finally, in the right room, with the right person, set it down. Helen pulled her daughter in and held her. Noah looked away. He looked at Richard, who had come back from the door and was standing at the edge of the room, watching his wife and daughter. The way men watch things they love and cannot fix, with full presence, and the particular restraint of knowing that presence is the thing required, not action. Richard met Noah's eyes. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face said enough. Noah nodded once. Richard nodded back. Sophie, standing beside Noah with her shoulder against his arm, looked up at him. "Dad," she said, very quietly, "if she hadn't paid you, would you still have picked us?" He looked down at her. She was asking the real question, not the child version. The full version, the one that included everything this week, had been the kiss on the dock, the nebulizer, the dining room, The way Vivian had held his hand in the dark with no audience, and no reason except that she wanted to. If none of this had started the way it started, would you still be standing here? He didn't answer immediately. Because Sophie deserved a real answer, not a fast one. I don't know how it would have started, he said. But I know where it ends up. Sophie looked at him, testing the answer against whatever metric she used for truth. That's not a real answer. No, he agreed. It's not. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Vivian, still at the table with her mother, composed again now, but changed visibly. Permanently changed, the way something is changed when it's been under enough pressure long enough to rearrange itself at the core. Sophie looked back at her father. She has to answer it herself, Sophie said. Doesn't she? Yeah, Noah said. She does. Sophie absorbed that, nodded, went back to her chair and picked up the roll she hadn't finished, and ate it with the calm practicality of a child who had decided that whatever happened next, dinner was still dinner. Richard Cross looked at this 8-year-old girl eating a dinner roll in the wreckage of an anniversary dinner. He sat down. He picked up his fork. And after a moment, because someone had to, he said, Helen, this roast is the best one you've ever made. Helen looked at him from across the table where she still sat with her daughter. And she laughed, the real one, the one that came from somewhere below strategy and above effort, the one that had apparently survived 40 years, and one very destructive dinner, and was apparently not done with any of them yet. It's the same recipe, she said. It's always the same recipe. And it's always the best one. She shook her head at him. The way she'd been shaking her head at him, Noah understood for 4 decades. With love so established it no longer needed announcement. Noah sat back down at the table. He looked at Vivian. She looked back at him. Between them, across the candles and the china and the ruined formal occasion that had somehow become the most honest dinner any of them had ever sat through, something held, not resolved, not simple, not without the weight of everything that still needed to be said and decided and worked through, but real, undeniably, irreversibly real. And in that room at that table with his daughter eating a dinner roll and Helen Cross laughing at the same joke she'd been laughing at for 40 years, that was the only thing Noah Bennett had ever needed anything to be. The authorities came the next morning, not dramatically, not with lights or noise. 2 investigators from the State Economic Crimes Unit, one from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and Vivian's security director, Marcus Webb, who had driven through the night from Richmond and arrived looking like a man who had been awake for 20 hours and intended to stay awake for 20 more. Noah made coffee for all of them. Nobody asked him to. He just made it because there were people in the house who needed it, and he knew where Helen kept the mugs. Marcus sat up at the dining room table with a laptop and 2 external drives and spent 40 minutes going through everything Vivian had pulled remotely the night before. He didn't say much while he worked. When he finished, he looked up at Vivian with an expression that confirmed everything without requiring words. 17 access events, Marcus said. 14 of them correlate directly to the Crosswave acquisition tender documents. The routing is clean enough that someone with serious technical help built this. Graham didn't do this alone. The executive, Vivian said. We think so. We're pulling his access records now. Marcus looked at Noah's photographs on the table beside his laptop. These are good. Clear cable routing, visible indicator, light timestamp on the metadata. He looked at Noah. You take these yourself. This morning, before anyone was up. What made you look behind the shelving unit? The indicator light was the wrong color for a residential connection, and the cable routing didn't match the rest of the boathouse wiring. Different gauge, different age. Someone installed it separately and tried to make it look incidental. Marcus looked at him for a moment. What do you do for a living? Marine engine repair. Huh. He went back to his laptop. You'd have made a decent investigator. Richard Cross was sitting at the far end of the table, listening to all of it. He had been quiet since the previous evening, not shut down, not angry, just the quiet of a man who was processing something large and doing it carefully. He asked questions when he needed to. He signed what the investigators asked him to sign regarding the boathouse access and his hospitality journal. He answered their questions about Graham's visits with the precise, detailed memory of a man who kept track of things. At one point, while Marcus was on a call, Richard looked at the documents on his own table, his home, his lake, his boathouse, and said to no one in particular, "He sat at this table. He told me his father was in hardware. We talked about supply chain management for an hour." Nobody answered him. There was nothing to say to that. Helen came in with a plate of food nobody had asked for, either set it on the sideboard and put her hand briefly on Richard's shoulder as she passed. He covered it with his own for a second, before she moved on. Sophie was in the kitchen, doing homework. She'd brought from Briar Glen, technically, and actually listening to everything through the open doorway, which everyone in the house understood and nobody addressed. Graham had been picked up at a hotel 40 minutes from the estate at 7:15 that morning. Marcus told them this without particular drama, the way professionals deliver facts. The hotel had been booked under a different name. His personal phone had already been seized. When Marcus told her that Vivian was looking out the window, she didn't turn around. "The executive at Crosswave," she said. "Who is it?" "David Reyes." She was still for a moment. Then she nodded. Once. The nod of someone who had suspected and still isn't ready for confirmation. "He's been with the company 6 years," she said. "Yes." "He was in the room for every acquisition discussion for the last 18 months. "Yes." She turned from the window. Her face was composed. The kind of composed that takes real work. "Okay," she said. "What do we do next?" Marcus walked her through it. Noah listened from the kitchen doorway with his coffee, not inserting himself, not being a mechanic in a room full of lawyers and investigators. Just present. Available. The way he was available when Sophie had a bad night, not solving it just there. After the investigators left, after Marcus had packed his drives and promised updates by evening after the house had gone quiet, in the specific way of a place where something large has just passed through it. Vivian sat down on the stairs. Not in a chair. Not in the formal sitting room. On the third step of the main staircase with her jacket still on, like she'd been heading somewhere and forgot where. Noah sat down beside her. They were quiet for a moment. "David Reyes," she said. "I hired him personally. I read his reference letters. I had lunch with him and his wife." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. The thumb movement. Once. "I thought I was a good judge of people." "You are." "I just listed 3 examples of being wrong about people. You're listing 3 examples of people who worked very hard to deceive you. That's different." He looked at the steps. A good engine can fail if someone deliberately sabotages it. That's not a design flaw. She looked at him. "You compare everything to engines." "I know what I know." She almost smiled. It didn't fully arrive, but it came close. Closer than anything had come that morning. "The board is going to call today," she said. "Marcus will have filed the incident report by noon. By 2 o'clock there will be an emergency session." She leaned her head back against the wall. "They're going to tell me this reflects poor judgment, that my personal choices compromised company security, that I need to demonstrate clarity of decision-making going forward." A pause. "By which they mean I need to distance myself from you." Noah didn't say anything. "They're not wrong technically," she continued. "I brought a stranger into a situation connected to my company's security. The fact that the stranger turned out to be the person who found the breach doesn't change the optics of the original decision. What are you going to do?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I've been asking myself that since 5 this morning." She looked at the front door, which the investigators had closed behind them 30 minutes ago. "Every time before every time, there was something that cost me personally, versus something that cost me professionally, I chose the professional. Every time." Her voice was level. "It was the logical choice. The company employs 240 people. The company's decisions affect clients, partners, investors. My feelings are—" She stopped. "Your feelings are what Vivian—" She looked at him. "I was going to say they're just mine." "Yeah. That sounds worse out loud than it did in my head." "Little bit." She looked at her hands. "For most of my life, I've believed that the responsible thing, the genuinely responsible thing, was to protect the institution over the individual. That personal sacrifice in service of something larger was just good leadership. She paused. I still believe that mostly, but I'm starting to understand that there's a version of it that's just... She stopped again. Different stop this time. That's just fear with better vocabulary. Noah looked at her. You're going to have to say the hard thing to the board, he said, and then you're going to have to mean it. I know. Not the managed version, the real one. I know, Noah. Because if you stand in front of them and give them a version that protects you professionally and sounds like honesty, you'll spend the next year building the same walls you just tore down. She looked at him, not defensively, with the particular attention of someone receiving something they need, even though it isn't easy. You don't pull anything, she said. No. Most people soften things for me. Most people are managing you. I'm not managing you. He held her gaze. I'm talking to you. She absorbed that, let it be what it was. Stay today, she said, while the board calls. I'm not asking you to sit in the room. She stopped. I want to know you're in the house. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, got up, straightened her jacket. Then she stopped on the step above him and looked down. Noah, last night, what Sophie asked you? She met his eyes. She was right. I have to answer it myself. I know. I'm not ready to answer it yet. I know that too, but I want to. Something in her voice that had never been there before. Not the composed Vivian, not the strategic Vivian, just a woman saying a true thing. I want to be someone who can answer it. He looked up at her. You already are, he said. You just have to believe it. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she went upstairs. He stayed on the step a while longer. From the kitchen he heard Sophie close her textbook. Dad? Yeah. She's going to be okay. I know. I just thought you should hear someone say it. He smiled. Looked at the door she'd disappeared through. Thanks, Soph. You're welcome. Also, I finished my homework and Richard said he'd take me out on the boat if an adult came. Give me 5 minutes. The board call lasted 3 hours. Noah knew this because he spent those 3 hours in the boathouse with Richard, who had decided that the boat engine needed another look. Now that the first repair was settled, and who used engine work the way Noah used it, as the thing you do with your hands, while your mind works through everything that can't be fixed with tools. They didn't talk about Vivian or the board. They talked about the engine. About the best approach for winterizing an inboard this old. About a marina Richard knew in Beaufort, where the service was actually worth what they charged. About Sophie, who had asked 8 questions about the fuel injection system during their morning on the water, and retained all the answers which Richard described with the tone of a man who had found something unexpectedly valuable. At one point, without preamble, Richard said, Her mother and I failed her in this. Noah looked up from the fuel line. We pushed Graham, Richard continued. We liked him. I was comfortable and familiar, and we were so focused on wanting her to be less alone that we didn't ask the right questions. He turned a socket wrench in his hands. We made it easier for him to be here. We gave him access. You trusted someone who worked very hard to earn your trust. So did she, for 18 months. Richard set the wrench down. And she carried it alone for 4 years because she didn't want us to feel responsible. Noah waited. She learned that from us, Richard said. The protecting, the managing information to prevent other people's discomfort. He looked at the engine. Helen and I have been doing it to each other for 40 years. We thought we were being kind. A long pause. Maybe sometimes we were. Noah thought about Natalie. About the last year of her illness, when she'd started managing information to telling him things were better than they were, sparing him the smaller griefs because he was already holding the large one. He'd known she was doing it. He'd let her because the alternative was taking something from her she needed to keep. I think, Noah said carefully, that the people who love each other most are often the ones who protect each other from information that would cause pain. And sometimes that's kindness. He looked at Richard. And sometimes it's just postponing the wait. Richard considered that for a long time. Natalie, he said. Not a question. Yeah. Vivian told us. Just the basics. That you'd lost her. Richard looked at the water outside the boathouse door. How long ago? 4 years. Sophie was 4. Almost. Richard was quiet. The water moved outside. The engine sat between them, clean and functional and patient. It's a particular kind of weight, Richard said finally. Carrying the love you have for someone when they're not there to receive it anymore. It is. Does it get lighter? Noah thought about it honestly, the way he always answered Richard's questions. It doesn't get lighter. You get stronger, which isn't the same thing, but it ends up feeling similar from the outside. Richard looked at him. Something in his face that was not pity and not sympathy, but something older than both, the recognition of one man who has carried weight for a man who is still learning how. She's good for you, Richard said. Not Natalie, Vivian. Not because she'll fix anything, but because she makes you want to keep going forward. Noah didn't answer that immediately, because it was true, and true things sometimes needed a moment before you put words around them. Yeah, he said. Richard picked up the wrench. Fix this fuel line, he said. And then I'm going to teach your daughter how to properly steer this boat before she decides she already knows. She probably already thinks she does. She told me so explicitly 20 minutes ago. He almost smiled. She's going to be terrifying when she's 30. She's terrifying now. Yes. Richard agreed with something that sounded a great deal like pride. She is. The board call ended at 4:17. Noah knew because Vivian came down the stairs at 4:22 with her jacket off and her sleeves rolled up, and she looked like someone who had been through something that cost real money but had paid it willingly. She found Noah in the kitchen making what Sophie had requested for dinner, which was grilled cheese, because Sophie had declared the week's formal dinners wonderful but personally exhausting. Vivian looked at the grilled cheese. She looked at Noah. The board wants me to issue a statement, she said. Distancing myself from, and I'm quoting, personal decisions that created security vulnerabilities. Are you going to? I told them that the personal decision that created a security vulnerability was not hiring you. It was not telling my family the truth about Graham 4 years ago, which allowed him continued access to people I love. She leaned against the counter. I also told them that the man they want me to distance myself from is the person who found the breach, documented it correctly, preserved the evidence when Graham tried to destroy it, and did all of that while being functionally employed as my fictional boyfriend. A pause. I told them those facts were relevant context. How did they take that? Mixed. The chairman was unhappy. 2 of the independent directors thought it was the most honest board communication they'd received in 2 years. She looked at her hands. Marcus backed me up. He said from a pure evidence standpoint, Noah Bennett is the reason this case is prosecutable. Noah turned the grilled cheese. What happens to the acquisition? Suspended for 30 days pending the independent audit, I announced. After that... She paused. After that it closes. The case against Graham and David is tight enough that it actually strengthens our position. We were the victims of corporate espionage. That's not a scandal. That's a prosecution. And you? She looked at him. I stay. I run my company. I answer for the things that are mine to answer for, and I stop answering for things that aren't. A breath. I'm done managing my way around the truth. He slid the grilled cheese onto a plate. That's going to be an adjustment, he said. Significant. For everyone around you. Yes. She paused. Including you. He looked at her. Because the truth includes this, she said. Whatever this is, and I'm not going to manage it or contain it or make it smaller than it is to protect anyone's comfort. She held his gaze. Including mine. He set the spatula down. What is it, he said. What you think this is? She didn't look away. It's the first thing in 4 years that I haven't been able to reduce to a strategy. That's for me, that's... She stopped, tried again. You came here for $15,000, and you stayed for something that has no price attached to it. And I don't know what to do with that except stop pretending I don't know what it means. He crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of her close enough that the counter behind her was the only thing between her and having to step back, and she didn't step back. "Sophie asked me if I would have chosen you," he said. "If none of this had started the way it started." "I know. I've been thinking about it since she asked." Vivian looked up at him. Not composed now, not managed. Just present, which was the bravest thing she'd done all week, and she'd done several brave things. "What did you decide?" she asked. "I think—" He paused. Chose the words carefully, the way he chose tools. "I think some people find each other the wrong way and end up somewhere right. And I think the way it started doesn't determine what it becomes." He looked at her. "What it becomes is what we build from here." She was very still. "I'm going to make mistakes," she said. "I know. I'm going to default to control when I'm scared. I'm going to manage things I shouldn't manage. I'm going to Vivian. Prioritize the wrong things sometimes, and I'm going to need someone to—" "Vivian." She stopped. "I know," he said. "I know all of that. I'm not asking you to be finished. I'm asking you to be honest while you're still figuring it out." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took the front of his shirt, just held it a fist of fabric, the way you hold something when you need to know it's solid. "Okay," she said, just that. But it was the fullest word he'd heard from her yet. He covered her hand with his. From the doorway, Sophie's voice arrived with the timing she had clearly inherited from no one living. "Is the grilled cheese done? Because I've been very patient, and I feel like that deserves to be acknowledged." Noah looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Noah. And then Vivian Cross, CEO, self-made millionaire woman, who had not laughed fully in front of another person in longer than she could accurately remember, laughed. The real kind. From somewhere below the composure and above the strategy, the full, unmanaged sound of it filling the kitchen. Sophie appeared in the doorway. She looked at Vivian, laughing. She looked at her father. She looked at their hands. She walked to the plate on the counter and picked up her grilled cheese. "Finally," she said, and walked back to the table. They left Lake Belhaven the following morning. Helen made breakfast before anyone asked for it. Richard carried Sophie's backpack to Noah's truck and spent 10 minutes showing her very seriously the correct way to identify a bald eagle versus an osprey, which Sophie photographed with her phone and said she would verify independently, which Richard found completely acceptable. Helen hugged Noah at the door. Not the polite version. The real one, brief and certain, the hug of a woman who had decided something and was expressing it physically because some decisions were best communicated that way. "You come back," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She pulled back and looked at him. "Helen." "Helen." She nodded, satisfied. Richard shook his hand at the truck. The same handshake as the first morning firm even done. Except this time when Richard released it, he kept his hand on Noah's for one extra second. "You're a good man," Richard said, quietly, directly, the way he said everything. Noah held the weight of that. "Thank you, sir." "Richard." A pause. "Richard." Richard nodded and went back to the house. Sophie was already in the truck. She had claimed the window seat and was going through her photographs with the focus of an archivist. She didn't look up when Vivian came to the passenger side window. "Sophie," Vivian said. Sophie looked up from her phone. "I meant what I said. To you. On the couch." Sophie regarded her. "About making mistakes?" "Yes." "And being scared?" "Yes." "And not leaving without telling the truth?" "Every word of it." Sophie looked at her phone, then back at Vivian. The 8-year-old diagnostic scan complete and unhurried. "Okay," Sophie said. "I'll think about it." Which was Noah knew the most Sophie was going to offer right now, and which was exactly the right amount. Not forgiveness on demand. Not performed acceptance. Just a door left open by a child who understood that real things took time. Vivian took it. She didn't ask for more. She came to Noah's window. He had the engine running. The familiar sound of it, the particular idle of a 250,000-mile F-150, that he knew the way, he knew his own heartbeat. "I'll call you tonight," she said. "Okay. I have the board follow-up tomorrow morning and the audit kickoff Wednesday, but She stopped. Started again. without the schedule. I want to talk to you. Vivian. Yeah. Just say that. A pause. I want to talk to you. Then call me. She looked at him. Then she reached through the window and straightened his collar, a small private gesture, no audience required, no performance attached to it. Just her hands adjusting something about him because she wanted to. He looked at her the whole time she did it. She pulled her hand back. Drive safe, she said. Always. He pulled down the gravel drive. In the rear-view mirror, the house sat at the edge of the lake in the morning light, and Helen and Richard stood on the porch watching them go, and Vivian stood where the drive met the path, not waving, not moving, just watching until the truck turned through the gate, and the road curved, and the trees took the view away. Sophie was quiet for the first hour. Noah let her be. Some things required quiet to settle, and his daughter was old enough to know when she was in the middle of one. At the hour mark, just past the Virginia state line, she said, "Do you think she'll actually call?" "Yeah, I do." "How do you know?" "Because she said she would, and she doesn't say things she doesn't mean." He glanced over at her. It took her a while to get there, but once she's there, she means it. Sophie looked out the window. The highway. The ordinary world going by at 70 miles an hour. "She's different from what I expected," Sophie said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone easier to not like." A pause. "She's kind of hard to not like once you stop waiting for her to perform something." Noah smiled. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Another mile went by. "Dad." "Yeah." "I told her she was scared of the wrong thing." "I know. She told me." Was that okay, to say that to her? He thought about it honestly. It was the truest thing anyone said to her all week, and she needed to hear it from someone who wasn't managing her. He looked at Sophie. It was very okay. Sophie absorbed that, looked satisfied with it. "She needed you to find her," Sophie said. "Not to save her, just to find her, like see where she actually was." He drove for a moment. "When did you get this smart?" "I've always been this smart. You're just catching up." He laughed. The full kind from the chest, the laugh he only had when Sophie produced it. She smiled out the window. They drove the rest of the way to Briar Glen with the windows cracked and the radio low, and Sophie reading her library book, and the particular silence of two people who had been somewhere important and were carrying it home carefully, the way you carry things that matter with both hands, paying attention, making sure nothing is lost in the movement from one place to another. Noah pulled into the driveway of the shop at 2 in the afternoon. He sat for a moment, looking at it. The cinder block walls. The sign his father had put up in 1991 that he'd repainted twice, but never replaced. The hole in the roof that he could see from the driveway patched with a tarp that was one good rain away from failing. $15,000. New roof. Sophie's medical bills. 3 months of mortgage. He looked at the tarp. He thought about a woman straightening his collar in a truck window. He thought about a kitchen where Helen Cross laughed at a Cary Grant impression. He thought about a dock at midnight and a kiss that had no audience and didn't need one. Sophie was already out of the truck, already going through the side door of the shop, the way she'd done every day of her life, already home. He got out. He stood in the driveway and looked at the building his father built, and that he had kept running through every hard thing that had come for it. His phone buzzed. A text from a Richmond number. "The audit starts Wednesday. I told the board the truth. All of it. I wanted you to know before anyone else does." He looked at it. Typed back. "How'd it feel?" 3 minutes passed. Then, like taking off something heavy I'd been wearing so long I forgot it was there. He put the phone in his pocket. He went inside. Behind him, the shop sat in the afternoon light, the tarp on the roof moving slightly in the wind, patient and impermanent and waiting the way. All things wait that know something is coming to fix them. The roof got fixed on a Thursday. Noah hired 2 guys from town he'd known since high school, reliable fast fare, and they spent 8 hours replacing the damaged section with materials that would outlast all of them. Sophie supervised from the ground with her library book and unsolicited structural opinions that the crew found alternately annoying and impressive. By evening, the shop had a roof that didn't let in stars. Noah stood in the parking lot looking at it until the light went and he couldn't see it anymore. Not because it was remarkable, because it was his. Because it was still standing, and so was he, and sometimes that was the whole victory. Vivian called at 9. She'd been calling every night since they left Lake Belhaven. Not long calls, always sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes an hour. Never scheduled, never structured. Just two people talking at the end of the day, the way people do when the day has been full, and they want to put it somewhere safe before they sleep. The audit cleared the first phase today, she said. No additional breaches beyond what we already documented. Good. The board is a pause, cautiously satisfied, which for this board is essentially a standing ovation. High bar. Extremely. He heard her move, the specific sound of her in a room he hadn't seen, her Richmond apartment he imagined. Something quiet around it. Marcus says the case against Graham and David is going to trial. The evidence from the boathouse terminal is central to the prosecution. The photographs. Your photographs. A pause. The DA's office asked if you'd be willing to provide a statement. Already told Marcus yes. She was quiet for a moment. Not empty quiet, the kind with something in it. Noah. Yeah. I want to come to Briar Glen this weekend. He'd been expecting it and not expecting it simultaneously, which was the particular state Vivian Cross had introduced him to, knowing something was coming and still not being ready for the specific shape it arrived in. Sophie has a school thing Saturday morning, he said. Science fair. She built a working model of a 4-stroke engine cycle. A pause. Of course she did. I may have helped a little. I'm sure you were very restrained about it. I was extremely restrained. She did about 90% herself. Can I come? Her voice was careful. Not performing nonchalance, actually careful the way you're careful about something that matters. To the science fair. He looked at the fixed roof in the dark. Yeah, he said. You can come. She arrived Saturday morning in a car he hadn't seen before. Not the company vehicle. Not something polished and communicative of status. A dark blue Subaru that looked like it had been purchased with the specific intention of being unremarkable. Sophie was already in her school clothes when Vivian knocked, and she opened the door herself and looked at Vivian on the porch and said, You drove yourself. I did. In that car. Yes. Sophie looked at the Subaru. Back at Vivian. Something in her 8-year-old calculus shifting slightly. Okay, Sophie said, and stepped back to let her in. Noah came downstairs and found them in the kitchen. Sophie explaining the engine model with the focused intensity of a person who has prepared for this moment and intends to get full credit for it, and Vivian listening with her complete attention, not performed attention, not the polite half-engagement of an adult tolerating a child's enthusiasm, but the real kind, the kind that asks follow-up questions because it actually wants to know. Why did you choose the 4-stroke specifically? Vivian asked. Because my dad says it's the most honest engine design ever made. Every stroke has a job and does exactly that job and nothing else. Sophie looked at the model. I like things that do exactly what they're supposed to do. Vivian looked at Noah over Sophie's head. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The science fair was held in the Briar Glen Middle School gymnasium, which smelled like floor wax and old bleachers, and the specific combination of 30 student projects all presenting simultaneously. Sophie set up her model at table 14 with the seriousness of a surgeon prepping an OR. She had a poster board, a printed explanation of each stroke, and a small hand-painted label on the model that read, Bennett and Daughter Engineering. Est, this year. Noah had not seen the label before. He looked at it for a long moment. Sophie was already explaining the intake stroke to a judge who had made the mistake of asking a casual opening question and was now receiving the full version. Vivian stood beside Noah. She put your name on it, Vivian said quietly. Yeah. That's... She stopped. Started again. That's everything, isn't it? Pretty much. They stood together at the edge of table 14, while Sophie walked the judge through compression power and exhaust, with the confidence of someone who had been thinking about engines since before she could reliably tie her own shoes, and the judge a retired engineer. It turned out who'd spent 30 years at a manufacturing plant in Greensboro, stopped taking notes, and just listened, because Sophie Bennett explaining a 4-stroke cycle was not something you interrupted. She won first place in the physical sciences category. She accepted the ribbon with dignity, and then immediately turned to Noah and said, "I want pancakes." "We can do pancakes." "Blueberry, from scratch." He looked at her. "Those fall apart." "I know, that's how you know they're right." He felt it in his chest, the specific weight of a thing carried from somewhere you loved to somewhere new, the way you carry someone with you, not as a ghost, but as a gift, the parts of them that become permanently yours. "Yeah," he said. "That's how you know." Vivienne looked between them. She caught the edge of it, not the full story, but enough. She didn't ask. She just reached out and straightened the ribbon on Sophie's shirt without being asked, to the way you do things for people when you've started thinking of them as yours. Sophie looked down at the ribbon, looked up at Vivienne. Didn't say anything. But she didn't move away either. They made pancakes in Noah's kitchen that afternoon. Vivienne had never made pancakes from scratch in her life, which Sophie found genuinely alarming and immediately corrective. She installed Vivienne at the counter with a mixing bowl and a whisk and specific instructions about the ratio of wet to dry ingredients, delivered with the authority of someone who had watched this done exactly right and exactly wrong many times. Noah stayed out of it. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and watched his daughter teach Vivienne Cross how to fold blueberries into batter without crushing them, and watched Vivienne follow instructions with the focused obedience of a woman who was accustomed to being the expert in every room, and was choosing deliberately, and without resentment, not to be the expert in this one. The first batch fell apart in the pan. Sophie said, "See, that's right." Vivienne looked at the collapsed pancake. "That doesn't look right. Too many blueberries. They can't hold together, but they taste better that way." Vivienne looked at the pancake for a moment. Then she picked up a fork and tried a piece directly from the pan, which Sophie approved of, and her expression changed the involuntary change of someone tasting something better than expected. "Oh," she said. "Right." Sophie was already adding more blueberries to the next batch. "They're falling apart, and that's the best thing I've eaten all week." "That's what my dad says." Sophie poured the next batch. "He says some things are better when they're a little broken." Noah looked at his coffee. Vivienne looked at him. He met her eyes across the kitchen. Some things are better when they're a little broken. He hadn't said that to Sophie as a philosophy. He'd said it once about a specific engine, a 1971 Chris Craft, with a cracked block that had been repaired so many times the repairs had become structural, the brakes literally holding it together. He'd said it was better than a factory engine because every repair was a record of someone caring enough to fix it. Sophie had been 6. She'd been sitting on the workbench eating a granola bar. She'd remembered. She always remembered. "Okay," Vivienne said very quietly to no one in particular, looking at the pan. "Okay, I understand now." Noah didn't ask what she understood. He already knew. 6 months passed the way. Good things pass not quickly, not without difficulty, but with the particular forward momentum of two people who have decided that the alternative is not acceptable. Vivienne spent part of each week in Briar Glen. Not all of it. Crosswave was a 240-person company in the middle of a successfully prosecuted corporate espionage case and a major acquisition close, and it needed her, and she was not the kind of woman who pretended her work didn't matter. But she came on weekends reliably, and sometimes she came mid-week when the Richmond apartment felt too quiet, and the lake house she'd purchased, small, unremarkable 40 minutes from the estate, needed something done to it that she didn't know how to do herself. Noah drove up to Richmond when he could. He brought Sophie on the visits that weren't school nights and on the ones that were. He came alone, and those nights were their own particular thing. 2 adults in a city apartment with nobody needing anything from either of them, for a few hours, talking or not talking or watching something on television that neither of them particularly cared about, because the point was never the television. He helped her with the lake house, not as a contractor, as someone who knew how things worked and wanted them to work well for her. He replaced the kitchen faucet, regraded the drainage on the south side, so the spring runoff didn't pool under the foundation, rebuilt the dock section that had soft boards. She did not write him a check. He did not let her. She asked once early whether she could at least cover the materials. He told her the materials were a gift, and she could accept gifts, or she could make the pancakes again, her choice. She accepted the gift. The Crosswave acquisition closed in month, 7 weeks behind the original timeline, fully cleared by the independent audit. The board issued a statement praising Vivian's decisive response to the security breach. 3 of them called her personally to say what they hadn't said in the formal statement, that her handling of it had been the most transparent and accountable crisis management they'd seen in their board careers. The chairman, who had pushed hardest for her to distance herself from Noah, sent a brief email. "You were right. I was managing optics. There's a difference." She forwarded it to Noah with no comment. He replied, "Told you." She replied, "Don't." He replied, "Too late." Graham Whitmore entered a guilty plea in month 5. David Reyes went to trial and was convicted on all counts. The sentencing coverage ran in 3 national business publications. Vivian did not read any of them. She already knew what had happened. She didn't need to watch it performed. Richard called her the morning the plea was announced. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm okay, Dad. Actually okay." "I know. I can hear it." A pause. "He's coming up next weekend. Saturday. Sophie has a... Bring them for dinner. Your mother's been planning it for 3 weeks. Don't tell Noah she's planning it. He'll offer to bring something and she wants to do the whole thing herself." "I won't tell him." "And Sophie does. She still liked that sparkling water with the lime." "Richard." "What?" "You remembered her drink." A pause. "Of course I remembered her drink. She's Sophie." His voice carried the particular gruff warmth of a man who had acquired a grandchild without any of the usual paperwork and found the arrangement entirely satisfactory. "Saturday, 6 o'clock. Don't be late." On the first anniversary of the week at Lake Belhaven, they went back. All of them. Richard and Helen had planned it the way Helen planned everything, completely warmly, with the particular attention to detail of a woman who understood that occasion mattered, and that the right occasion could hold a great deal of meaning without requiring any of it to be spoken. The estate was the same, the dock, the boathouse. The terminal had been removed, the connection severed the wall behind the shelving unit, just a wall again. The flag on the end of the dock, the water that breathed. Richard and Noah took the boat out in the morning. The inboard ran clean, and even the way it had been running since Noah fixed it a year ago. They didn't talk about anything important. They talked about the fishing, which had been better this year, according to Richard's very detailed personal records, and about a hydraulic issue Noah had been working through on a client's twin-engine Sportfisher, and about Sophie's most recent school report, which her teacher had described as comprehensive to a degree that suggests outside research, which was accurate. In the kitchen, Helen and Sophie were baking. Sophie had requested that they make the pie crust Helen had taught her the year before, and Helen had agreed, and they were doing it with the easy rhythm of 2 people who had been cooking together long enough to stop narrating it. Vivian sat at the kitchen table watching them. She had her laptop open. She closed it. She watched her mother adjust Sophie's grip on the rolling pin with a hand on her wrist. Patient and certain, the way you teach something you've done 10,000 times. She watched Sophie absorb the correction without ego. Try again, get it better. She watched her mother's face when Sophie got it better, the specific look of someone witnessing something they didn't know they needed to witness. Helen looked up and caught Vivian watching. She didn't say anything. She just looked at her daughter for a moment, with 40 years of love and 1 year of something new in it. The look of a woman who had gotten something back, she'd thought was permanently changed, who was choosing every day not to take it for granted. Vivian looked back. "Mom. I'm sorry for not telling you about Graham, about all of it." She'd said it before. She said it again because some things need more than one saying. "I thought I was protecting you." Helen set down the rolling pin. "I know." She came to the table and sat down across from her daughter. And I've been thinking about what to say to that for a year. She folded her hands on the table. I think we both did the same thing. Your father and I spent 40 years protecting each other from difficult things because we thought that was kindness. And we taught you that love meant managing other people's pain before they had to feel it. She looked at her hands. We were wrong about that, and you learned the wrong thing very well. Vivian was quiet. So we're both correcting, Helen said. Together, at the same time. She looked up. That seems fair. It does. Helen reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand once. Brief, certain. Now help with this crust before Sophie's perfectionism makes it too tough to eat. Sophie looked up from the counter. I heard that. You were meant to. Helen stood. Vivi, wash your hands. Vivian washed her hands. She stood at the counter between her mother and Sophie and learned how to make pie crust for the first time in her life, and she got it wrong twice, and Sophie corrected her with the patience of someone who had recently been corrected herself, and understood that correction was not criticism, but evidence of investment. And Helen narrated the process in the warm, specific voice of a woman who had been teaching this kitchen to people she loved for 4 decades. By the time the men came back from the lake, the kitchen smelled like butter and something sweet, and 3 women in various stages of flour dusting were standing around a counter that had seen a great deal of life and was seeing more of it now. Richard came in through the back door and looked at the kitchen and stopped. I took it in. His wife. His daughter. This girl who had arrived in their lives through an unusual door and stayed because she'd decided to. The flour. The pie. The ordinary, extraordinary mess of people making something together. He looked at Noah, who had come in behind him. Noah was already looking at Vivian. She had a streak of flour on her cheek that she didn't know about. She was listening to something Sophie was explaining with the full attention she gave everything, and there was nothing managed about her face, no composure, no calculation. Just a woman in a kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, being exactly where she was. Noah crossed the kitchen. He reached out and brushed the flour from her cheek with his thumb. She looked up at him. You've got... He showed her his thumb. She looked at it, looked at him, and laughed the full one, the unmanaged one, the one that had been getting easier to find over the course of a year. Until now, it arrived quickly, readily, like something that lived close to the surface and didn't need excavation anymore. I'm making pie, she said. I can see that. I got it wrong twice. Sophie told me. On the dock. Via text. Vivian looked at Sophie. You texted him? Sophie shrugged. He needed to be prepared. For what? For you being bad at something. He doesn't see that very often. I didn't want him to be startled. Richard made a sound that was definitively a laugh. Helen covered her smile with her hand. Vivian looked at this child, this 8-year-old, who had walked into her life through the side door of a paid arrangement, and decided in the way Sophie decided all things that she was worth the investment of honesty and something she had been carrying for a year. The last careful piece of it put itself down. You're a menace, Vivian said. Yeah, Sophie agreed. But I'm your menace, probably. Probably. It was the most Sophie had ever offered. It was everything. That evening after dinner, after the pie that had been imperfect and therefore correct, after Richard and Sophie had fallen asleep in adjacent chairs in the sitting room with the television on and nobody watching it, Noah found Vivian on the dock. The same lake. 1 year from the night she had stood here and told him about Graham, about what it felt like to be known as a strategy rather than a person, about the specific grief of being wrong, about everything you were most certain of. He sat beside her. She reached into her jacket pocket and held out something small. A key. Brass. Attached to a wooden keychain that had been painted carefully with the focused effort of someone taking a task seriously, with 3 small figures standing beside a dark blue pickup truck under a yellow sun that listed slightly to the left. He looked at it. Sophie painted it, Vivian said. I asked her to. She wanted the sun crooked. She said perfect suns look fake. He looked at the crooked sun. There are 2 keys on there, she said. One is the Richmond apartment. The other one, she paused. I bought a place. The cottage I told you about. It's 20 minutes from here. It's small and it needs work and the kitchen is terrible. How terrible? The faucet drips and two of the burners don't light. I can fix that. I know. That's not... She stopped. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking if you want to fix it together. Over time. At whatever pace makes sense. She looked at the water. I'm not asking you to move. I'm not asking Sophie to change schools. I'm not offering a solution. I'm offering... She paused. A door. He held the keys in his palm. The crooked sun. The three figures. The weight of a small piece of brass that meant something larger than its size. He thought about his father's shop, 31 years old, and still standing. He thought about a roof that had been fixed and would need fixing again someday, because that was the nature of roofs and the nature of things worth keeping. He thought about Natalie, whose pancakes fell apart and tasted better for it, who had told him that the only real waste was having something good and not living inside it fully. I thought about a woman who had arrived in his truck at a lake estate with a portfolio of scripted answers and had spent a year learning one true thing at a time, that the real answers were the only ones worth having. He closed his hand around the keys. I told you the first day, he said. I wasn't sleeping on the sofa. She looked at him. Something in her face that had no name, except that it was the full version of her every part present. Nothing held back. Nothing managed or reduced or protected from the risk of being seen. Good, she said. Because I'm asking you to stay. He took her hand. The lake held the dark around them patient and present the way it had been holding everything given to it for longer than any of them had been alive, without condition, without agenda, simply receiving what arrived and keeping it. Behind them, through the kitchen windows, the lights of the house were warm against the night. Richard slept in his chair, and Sophie slept in hers, and Helen had covered them both with blankets without waking either one, because that was what you did for people you loved. You stayed close enough to know when they were cold, and you did the small necessary thing, and you didn't make it mean more than it was, or less than it was. You just showed up. You just stayed. That was the whole of it. Not the grand gesture, not the perfect moment, not the arrangement that started with money and a signature, and ended up somewhere neither of them had planned for. Just two people who had told each other the truth when it cost something real, and had stayed anyway, and were still staying, and intended to keep staying, until staying was simply the unquestioned shape of their lives. Noah Bennett had come to Lake Belhaven with a toolbox and a moral objection and 15,000 reasons to compromise one for the other. He was leaving, had been leaving every time and coming back, which was the only direction that mattered, with something no amount of money had ever purchased, and no amount of fear had ever successfully protected against. He was leaving with people. His people. And that was the only thing in the end that had ever been worth the drive.